let's start. There's another speaker who is on the way. But 我先用中文简单的解释一下，然后我们就都进入到英文。I'll use Mandarin to introduce the purpose of our this forum, and then everything will be in English. I think people should be familiar or happy with that. 所以我们在想，基本上的一个问题就是，每一个同学都会有自己的一个研究计划，研究计划的背后有一个问题意识。可是当我们要去把这样子的一个研究计划展开成为一个，就是那样子的一个问题意识要展开成为一个计划，我们如何去利用我们的 supporting material， 就是支撑性的这个材料，包括可能是文本，不同的文本，可能是不同的 data。那我们如何用这些材料去论证我们的 thesis？所谓的 thesis， 大家知道，不管是 MA thesis 或者是那个博士的 dissertation， 它都是一个 argument。One thesis，the thesis statement， 它必须要透过我们的章节的安排，我们的大纲可能是3层，可能是4层去支撑我们基本的认证。所以今天要请这几位博士班的同学来，显然就是说他们也在研究的进行过程中，那很多东西也都是会尝试，失败再去 revise。那我很高兴他们愿意跟我们来 share 他们的问题意识如何透过他们的材料、他们的文本去支撑他们的论证，那以及他们用什么样的方法论。当然我们说方法论，它有的时候是哲学性的思辨，有的时候是文学的文本分析。可是我们现在慢慢注意到说，很多的计划它的 text 它就不只是written text， 它可以是报纸新闻，可以是社交媒体，可以是历史档案。可是历史档案又会跟当代的一些持续出现的论述或者是修辞，它会相关。所以说今天我们会请这4位同学来帮忙跟我们 share 一下，我们也会把这个演讲录影起来。那我刚才问的其他2位同学都没有问题，可能懂吗？可以吗？Okay, that's great. Your Mandarin is really leading up. So let me move on to my English introduction explanation and to explain why we arranged this mini forum. Apparently, the 4 students here are still ongoing, okay, with their project. They are experiments. There might be their trial, failure, and they redo it again, okay. But we want to learn from them. Okay, apparently many of you are working on your dissertation or thesis, and some of you are formulating your problematic and your project. So the core curiosity for us today is that when we have our problematic, that is, we find something that deserves our inquiry, deserves our research. So that curiosity, okay, sometimes it's not pure curiosity, but some kind of a disagreement, okay, some kind of critique, some kind of maybe indignation too, okay. But we want to formulate this problematic and construct it into a project with our research. Okay, so-called research is that we gather different material. We can say that they are data, they are text, they are historical archive, they are literature text, they are film text, they are newspaper messages or social media debates and whatever it is, those different texts, they coexist, okay, in a contemporary condition, and they support one another, even though we might not notice how a literary text is related to a philosophical debate or a governmental propaganda, or how this very subtle differentiation of social relations, for example, migrants or inequality, or this reorganizing social order, okay, through this geopolitical or political economic transformation, how those are reflected in a film or in a piece of social media debates and so on, all right? So this is, we need to be very critical but also conscious of the so-called media or text that we are confronting, and what is the hidden message or hidden logic behind this text, right? What produced this text? And that production is based on what kind of ideology or what kind of maybe racist mentality and so on, or populism and so on, okay? And so that we do not just interview people to get the data to support our argument, because interview data also is a service, right? Just like the social media, the debate, we know on social media anything can happen, right? Or in the literary work or a filmic text, they are all surface that we need to read and think what is the mechanism that produced this text, right? So everyone can try to think whatever I said and against your own project, right? Including the four of you. We need to persuade people. We need to convince people that the point we are making, okay, can be analyzed and interpreted, argued through the text we select. So the most important thing now is that what are the texts we want to select? What are the methodology we want to use in order to formulate our project, okay, into a real research project, right? This is not just compilation of different people saying and this and that. This is your theorization. Whether you are an MA student or a doctoral student, this is your intervention. When we say intervention, 介入, okay, we don't just follow other people's opinion or repeat the same interpretations. We intervene. We propose our maybe our hypothesis, our conjecture, and we want to formulate a new theoretical interpretation so that we make our own case. Right. So today we are very happy that we have 4 doctoral students. We will proceed first from Han. Originally I thought we have Fernan to be the first speaker, but I think people need more time to digest the methodology you are using. So I guess it requires some technique. I think it's quite challenging to me too. So, but it doesn't mean Hans is easier, because reading cinematic text is not easy, right? We don't just say the text, the film is a film, and they show us everything, right? So we want to start from Han, and then Kasia, and then Lungani, and Fernan, okay? We are tape recording this because it has to follow the speakers, so that later on our future student can really consult and learn from you, okay? And you will introduce yourself, and you will introduce your project. Each of you have 20 minutes. We have flexibility because altogether we have 3 hours. Plus, deduct this 10 minutes that I made the introduction. Okay. And I think we also would welcome discussion or question. Maybe afterwards, we go through so that we know how to manage our time. We go through the full presentation, and then we have an open forum for how to use the data. You can double question, cross questioning each other, okay? And we can open for every student. Okay. So, do you want to start? Thank you.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon. So, this is a mini talk, a very friendly talk, and I'm going to share with you things that I have experienced and have done, and which I think might be helpful for you. So, oh, sorry, my name is Han. I come from Vietnam. I'm a PhD student at SRCS. So the title of my project is Doi Moi Period in Vietnam through the lens of cinema, the rural to urban migrant, the prostitute, and the urban poor.
Take it easy. For the 4 of them, they are practicing their defense, right? Either proposal defense or their final defense. And for every one of you, don't worry, it's also only sharing. Okay, I think this is a good opportunity for them to share with each other and also share with you. And whatever question you have, you are welcome to raise, right? Because your question may be helpful to them, and your question will also be helpful to other students and to yourself. Okay. Challenging questions are always welcome.
Let's just consider this a very friendly sharing session.
Yeah, right.
Not a rehearsal of a defense. I mean, that's very intimidating.
Okay. Yeah, right. All right.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, I told you guys the title of my project, and here are the contents that I'm going to talk about during the next 20 minutes. Why I choose this topic, what is the problematic of my research, what are the hypotheses, how do I select and analyze films, and when talking about these points, I'm going to use some examples from the film Three Seasons by Tony Nguyê in 1999. Yeah. And so I think the first thing that I need to explain to those who are not familiar with Doi Moi is this Doi Moi period in Vietnam. I think there's only 1, 2 Vietnamese students in this one. Right, so in Vietnam, after 1975, when the North Vietnam Army won the war with South Vietnam and the Americans, that was in 1975, from that year to 1986, and some people believe that that practice continued until 1989, but that started around 1986. The economy model that was adopted in the country, in Vietnam, was called the centrally planned economy, which means that the government subsidized the people and owned and controlled all aspects of the economy. And so the economy was closed. There were no economic exchanges between Vietnam and outside. But towards the end of the 1980s, there were lots of problems. There were rampant poverty and also hungers, and there were near famines. So at the end of the 1980s, the Vietnamese government decided that enough is enough, now we have to change. So they decided to open up the country's market. Now, from 1986 to now, Vietnam's market is open for foreign investment and importation. There are economic exchanges between Vietnam and the outside world, and also, of course, the economy has been privatized. So this period is called the Doi Moi Period. Doi Moi in Vietnamese means a renovation. We call it a renovation period or economic reforms. So
just a minute.
Yes.
In Mandarin, 改革新开放, just like in Mandarin China, 改革开放. Alright. So that is economically, it's a new policy for developmental policies and so on. Yeah.
All right. So the change of policy has led to substantial transformations of the Vietnamese society. So you might imagine why I choose this period for my research. And there are also some other reasons why I choose this topic. First of all, cinema is considered a form of historiography or a writing of history. But in this case, not official history or not the history that is written by any government, but by ordinary people. Cinema brings into sharp focus the contradictions and problems of a rapidly changing society and gives voice to the concerns, the joys, and the sorrows of ordinary people during their day-to-day existence. And another reason that I choose this is that I see a niche in the literature, in this field, in this area of research, because most of the scholars that study Vietnamese cinema are Western scholars, and I see that with my in-depth Vietnamese understanding of the Vietnamese language as well as the Vietnamese culture, in ways that are unavailable to these scholars, I might be able to contribute something to this field. And also because I've always been very passionate about cinema, film, movies, so by doing this I also kind of make my hobby my career, just to keep myself interested, because it's very important in doing research, try to be interested, it keeps you go a long way. So the problematic of my research is this, very short and concise. While Vietnam has become one of the fastest growing economies in the region, the contemporary Vietnamese society has situated these groups of marginalized people, that is the prostitute, the rural to urban migrant, and the urban poor, in vulnerable places, multiplied their numbers and exacerbated their adversity. So this is the problem that I see. And using cinema, I look into how cinema portrays their struggle, and I hypothesize that through a realist look into contemporary Vietnamese society, cinema portrays the everyday struggle of rural to urban migrants, prostitutes, and urban poor people, and through cinematic language, empowers the voices of these marginalized people. So you could see that there are two parts of there are two hypotheses here. And so here comes the methodology. How do I select films? Currently I have 7 films in my film focus, and these are 3 of those. So I choose films that first of all, centralize my research populations, meaning this one in the middle actually is a very special case because it actually centralizes all of the research populations in my project. And then this one on the left, wrong, this one is a very new one. It is about the urban poor people, both adults and children. And this one on the right, flapping in the middle of nowhere, this one is about the rural to urban migrants, and also the prostitutes. Second of all, I choose films that are recognized nationally and internationally because that means that they are recognized as valuable film texts. You could see here that they are like winners of several awards. And another thing that I consider while trying to choose films for my research is that they might be controversial. It doesn't mean that I will always choose films that are scandalous or controversial, but when something is controversial, I tend to pay attention and try to see what's going on. Why does it draw so much attention? For example, this one from here, it was the winner of the highest award at the Busan International Film Festival, the New Currents Award, last year, 2019. But it was banned from Vietnamese cinemas for almost a year. And so I was curious what's going on, why was it banned? So I looked into the film and saw that it's really fitting for my research purposes. Why it was banned? Because it actually portrays a lot of contents that are usually censored from Vietnamese screen because of some sensitive anti-government contents. Okay, and also I try to access different versions of the film texts, for example, versions from the free-floating versions from the internet, DVDs, and also I plan to visit the Vietnam Film Institute and ask for the permission. I think I have to pay some money to access their film archives. I think these versions will have very different quality, but more importantly, they might even have different contents. Like some shots are available in one version but are not in some other versions. And this might reveal, the state's concerns about what kind of things they want to show to the public and what kinds of things that they want to conceal from the public eye. This one, for example, it was actually screened in Taiwan like a few months ago, but too bad I couldn't make it to the movie theater. I watched it online, and I was shocked because of the kinds of things that are in the film, because usually I don't see that kinds of things being discussed on film in Vietnam. So I'm very curious. When I get back to Vietnam, one of the first things I do will be going to a DVD store and check out the DVD that is available in Vietnam. What do they have the scenes that are in the version that I watched from the internet? There are also some cautions along the way of doing research about film. The first thing is the copyright issues. I think doing research like watching a film and then writing about it is quite simple. It's okay, but it gets complicated when you have to show your research or present at a conference, for example. Then you have to consider what video you can show. Are you violating any copyrights of anyone, any party? Do you have to pay for the video you show, or you have to get permission from someone? That kind of thing. And also, I've been quite willing to adjust my research scope. Well, I've adjusted it twice. And I think this is one of the essential, integral part of qualitative research, because basically, after all, qualitative research is about the progressive focusing process. So we have to readjust our research all the time. So at first, for example, I wanted to do research about women only, women on film and women making films in Vietnam. But the first thing is that there are not so many female directors that have made so many films that I could research. So that was out. Now I consider both male and female directors. And then I wanted to do research about women only in terms of the populations. I wanted to do research about rural to urban female migrants, the female prostitute, and also minority women. But I found out that there are also not a lot of films about these people, these women. So I adjusted again the scope of my research. Now they are the rural to urban migrants, both men and women, prostitutes, female prostitutes, and the urban poor, including men and women and also children, because of the films that I've chosen. I've also been trying to open to the possibility of my hypothesis being refuted or further complicated. So my hypothesis, this is not slides here's my hypothesis over here. Okay. The cinema portrays the everyday struggle of rural to urban migrants, prostitutes, and urban people, and through cinematic language empowers the voices of these marginalized people. But actually, when I look into some of the films, I find that not all of them empower marginalized people, and then some of them empower one group of marginalized people, but actually silence like another group of marginalized people. So these hypotheses are going to be further complicated. They are not going to be the same by the end of this research. I'm only like 1/3 of the research, and it has already changed. Okay, and right, and anyway, in a nutshell, let the films guide you through your research. Just because we are doing research about cinema, so let cinema guide us. So this is the last point: how to analyze films. I kind of divide the analysis stage into two phases. The first one is initial analysis, and the other is in-depth analysis. So in the initial analysis phase, I try to look into the director's background, because after all, the film is a director's product. So it's where a director projects their thinking, their research, actually. We can even consider a film some literature in the field. So we have to look into the director's background, what shapes his beliefs, her beliefs, or perceptions of the research populations and the problematic. For example, some Vietnamese nationals and some overseas Vietnamese filmmakers might have very different perceptions, as well as experience, for sure, experience of the Vietnamese, the economic reforms and the reality of that policy. I also try to consider the context of when and where a film is made, even if that film is set in the past, because this might reveal the film director's revisionist perspective, if any, and what kind of context informs him or her into, making that kind of film or having that kind of thinking. And in the in-depth analysis phase, here is what I do so far. Well, in the future there might be some changes, I might do something more, but for now I try to engage with the secondary studies of the film texts that I choose. Secondary studies like the writings, the articles, the books that have already been published about these films. And then I try to add to the existing critiques. I'll give you an example. Here, the film 3 Seasons. Okay, actually I have opened. Is it Chrome? Okay. So, this film is about, this film is very complex because there are different storylines, different demographics. But yes, please. Could you please? Thank you. So in this scene, come on, talk me through it. This guy is a cyclo driver. The cyclo with like the tripod, 3 wheels vehicle, like a tuk-tuk, but like simpler. Like a tuk-tuk, but simpler, and it's not mechanic. You have to actually pedal. So this is a cyclo driver. He's, by the way, a very famous Vietnamese actor, very talented. And he's a cyclo driver. He is supposedly in love with this prostitute. Lots of scholars argue that he's in love with this one, but I might argue otherwise. But anyway, that's not the point. He is supposedly in love with this prostitute. He buys a night with her, like he pays her in order to spend a night with her. But he doesn't ask for sex. He only asks to like watch her sleep, give her a gift and everything. So this is a scene, and then in this scene there is something spectacular happening, and then there is a scholar writing about this particular scene and that particular thing, and then I try to add to her critique. So yeah. Sorry, is a sound on? This is a little quiet here, so it's okay. her to change into a nightgown. Here she is. Something very interesting is going to happen here. There it is. He lifts the curtain to show her image in the mirror. Okay, there. Yeah, notice that we can only see her reflection but not his. I think that's it. Huy, could you please turn on the lights? Thank you. And then there is some traditional Vietnamese music in the background. See? All right. So now I'm going to show you the analysis of Janet. Published on the Journal of Vietnamese Studies. This is an American journal. Okay. Here, Lungani, could you please help me read this part?
From when?
From when Lan arrives.
Okay, so from when Lan arrives at the hotel room.
Hai is a name.
Hai insists that she remove her makeup and dress, donning instead the long cotton nightgown he has purchased for her. When she emerges from the bathroom, stripped out of her usual costume and adorned instead according to his wishes, he first directs her to walk back and forth for me, and then in an extraordinary shot they move to the sliding glass doors of my hotel room, so that the cinematic frame produces a three-shot, a doubled image of Lan and her reflection, with Hai standing behind her, but doubled in the glass. It is as if he has split her from her own image, having reconstructed her in innocence and docility. He leads her by the hand to the bed, positions her and steps away to gaze at her unconscious sleeping body.
Okay, thank you very much. So here's the important thing that Janet says that I'm going to add to. It is as if he has split her from her own image. So yeah, I'm just making the points that one of the things that I do when analyzing a film is that I try to engage with the existing literature. I try to add to what other scholars have already said about some things in film. So here is what this is not the last version, the final version, so it's not refined or anything, but I'm going to read this part for you. This is my analysis. Requesting Lan to remove her makeup and put on a long gown that covers her entire body, Hai clearly takes pleasure from the sight of Lan walking back and forth in that outfit, yet not sexual pleasure. It feels almost like he is enjoying the sight of a project he put together successfully, or like a parent satisfactorily looking at his child donning new fitting clothes. He then proceeds to show the audience his achievement. Leading her to the window, Hai deliberately pulls the curtain up to reveal the window glass and leaves her standing next to the glass window while he himself stands next to the curtain. Hai's gesture of lifting the curtain in this scene is spectacularly deliberate, with calculations to reveal Lan's double image in the window glass. Now, next to Hai's consistent image is Lan's two selves, one within and the other without the window glass. Janet offers a very insightful reading of this sequence. It is as if he has split her from her own image. I want to add to Janet's astute observation another dimension that is with regard to the spectator, not only showing Lan what she can become if she shrugs off her hooker appearance and way of life. Hai also exhibits to the audience Lan's innocent self in this scene, Hai, who has already become aware of Lan's innocence and inner beauty, not only reminds Lan of her pure self, but also simultaneously shows that side of her to the audience, also the Vietnamese collectivity. By reaching out to spectators and calling their attention to the spectacle on the screen, that is Lan, the sequel driver breaks the fourth wall. As such, Ha is not merely a passive observer, but also an active educator for both Lan and spectators, the director's avatar indeed. So that's my analysis and how I add to something that has already been discussed. And I think the last thing is okay. Besides engaging with the existing literature, it is important to identify this. What can you bring to the table? What new things can you bring to the discussion of this film or this field work altogether? How much minute? So here's an example. 3 Seasons, this film that you just saw a clip of, it is, okay. It is romanticized and idealized through the nostalgic lens of the filmmaker. Because this filmmaker, I forgot to introduce to you that he is Vietnamese but diasporic Vietnamese. He moved to the US with his family in 1975 as war refugees. And now, because of the Doi Moi policy, Vietnam is welcoming like diasporic Vietnamese back to the country to do businesses. And filmmaking is one of the businesses. And so he is, with this film, he is trying to reconstruct a Vietnam that has been lost to him. And I try to prove the point that 3 Seasons is actually not about a Vietnamese reality or a reality of the city or contemporary Vietnam during the Doi Moi period, but rather a romanticized version, idealized, in which Tony Bui idealizes the male morality. So here I try to like analyze the two images, the signal driver and the prostitute. Both of them are quite romanticized. For example, a prostitute, I am going to juxtapose the prostitute in this film. That was the plan for this talk, by the way, that I was going to talk about the prostitute in this film juxtaposed with the prostitute in one of the Vietnamese directors inside Vietnam's film, which is Szpargala. I believe you know about that film. And to prove how this prostitute, the prostitution and also a prostitute's life in this film is actually romanticized and not quite realistic, put in the Vietnamese society of these days. But yeah, sometimes you have to be, for example, to prove that point, I actually had to look for like the GDP, average income, yes, of Vietnamese per capita of Vietnam in 1999 when this film was released, because according to this film, the prostitute makes $50 US per night, and that in Vietnam at that time would have been impossible, because for one person for a year in Vietnam during that year would make only a little more than $150. So $50 per night for a prostitute in that society is impossible. So sometimes, yeah, I mean, this is what I think that I could bring to the table because of like my knowledge of the Vietnamese society, of the culture, not just that thing, but also in terms of language, for example. This film is quite, because Tony Bui moved to the US when he was 3 or 4, so his Vietnamese is actually not that good, not that great. So the language, the dialogues in the film, some of them are quite unnatural. And as a Vietnamese, you would see that, but not the other scholars, the Western scholars, for example. And meanwhile, some of the scholars argue that this film actually reconstructs. Actually, it's what here. Take a look at the title. 3 Seasons refocuses American sites of Vietnam. Janet actually argues, in general, this article argues that 3 Seasons actually views Vietnam from a Vietnamese perspective, and not American perspective as in like Vietnam War movies from Hollywood. But I would argue that it's diasporic Vietnamese and not Vietnamese per se, not Vietnamese like Vietnamese in Vietnam, from Vietnam. So yeah, so I think it's important to engage with existing literature and also try to come up with something new, something that only you could bring to the table. That would be important in research about that. So yeah, thank you very much.
I changed my mind. I think it's better for us to have a discussion right afterwards.
All right.
Oh, I give my react.
Yes, sure.
But in the end, I think we have a general open discussion for methodology. So questions from the floor view, but also from the floor. Students who are interested in film studies or this is some interesting thing. Take film as a historiography, okay, not film per se. There are other interesting things about the film.
Yeah, just curious about when you're analyzing the field, do you only include secondary critique, or do you also analyze other like media critique?
Oh yes, it's actually a good question. I mainly focus or like try to engage with the academic, the scholarly writings. However, I also include some of the film reviews from the media, from newspapers, online newspapers, for example, and also like interviews of filmmakers and actors in that form, just to get the context. Like, for example, I know the film Szpargala, one of the films. For now, it's not in the corpus, but I'm going to discuss a little bit about this film because it's very much related to like films about prostitutes in Vietnam. The director and the actors actually went into like nightclubs, for example. In one of the interviews, they said that they went to nightclubs to like socialize with prostitutes to get to know them as a kind of study, as a kind of research before they made the film. So I think it's important to know that they actually took the time to do research and also what intention, for example, a director has when he or she makes a film. But it wouldn't be the central point of my argument because it doesn't matter, it matters little what intention someone has before making a film, because interpretations are diverse and you don't have to strictly stick to a director's intention. It's a fallacy. Thanks.
Other questions? Yeah.
The point of your project is the film or the Vietnam the societies or both?
Oh yes. Oh, it's a question that I've been struggling with. I think both. Both, yes. Because I actually put that point in the presentation, but I was afraid it was going to be too complex.
One more question is, if you want to research the societies, why don't you choose the documentaries? Because as we know, the documentary can reflect the societies directly.
Yeah. Okay. I think I have a few points to say about this. First of all, like I said earlier, I let cinema guide me to my research population and to my films. So these are the films that I found. And documentaries are great, but there are actually not that many. There are a couple films about these populations, but not that many. That's the first thing. And also, I believe even if it's a documentary, it's also a filmmaker's work as much as it's a fiction movie. So even though you claim that this is true because it's a documentary, there is some manipulation of the camera, the film director, and everything you put in the mise-en-scène. So fiction movies, in terms of reflecting a director's thinking and research, might not be that far from truth and from reality as documentaries are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and also for your first question, is my research about cinema or also about film's reality, right? Both. But I use cinema, like through the lens of cinema, I want to look at realities. And of course, in my literature review, I will have to discuss like what has been written, not in cinema, but in like literature about these populations in Vietnam, what are the realities in Vietnam. And then when looking at these films, I have to see whether they reflect this literature or not. And even if they don't reflect this literature, what experiences have been written, it might not be because it's not true or it's not reality. So I have to, I don't know yet how I'm going to go about it, but for now I'm considering both. But the focus is still on cinema. This is only for references, reality. Yeah. Yes, Tim.
I feel like your project is more focused on the realism aspect of film or reality, or that like you focus on the content of the film. I'm curious that do you want to analyze the artistic aspect?
Yes, yes, of course. I do want to analyze the form of the films, like how they want, in terms of contents, in terms of direct narratives for sure, because it's obvious. But at the same time, I really want to focus more on the artistic aspects of the films, like how these directors transmit. Send these messages out, like using these cinematic devices. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Other questions? We still can have 5 minutes. I think first 10 minutes discussion for each project. Okay.
Well, just a brief comment, I think. I think there's a dilemma between what you intend to do. Like you were saying that you wanted to analyze this film based on based on 3 things, I think. One is the director's effect on the formation of the film or the creation of the film. Second is on the realities of Vietnam at the time when this film was produced, or probably the context in which this film was produced. And third could be like the mixture of elements that are being shown in some spectacular scenes that you found spectacular. So my concern is that those 3 things might need different forms of analysis and different forms of interpretation. And if you focus on the 3, it will make your analysis blow up. Like for example, if I follow, for example, Roland Barthes' idea of death of the author, I'd rather look into the different interpretations and the continuation of reading of text. Like the text, when it's produced in 1999, will never be the same as how it could be interpreted at the time when I'm reading it now. So what I'm saying is that maybe if you focus on that aspect of the research, then understanding the history or the context of 1990s will not be so relevant. Because the point is, when you look into the artistic impact or the mixture of elements in the film, it doesn't matter if the amount being paid to a prostitute is the same as the amount being paid in that film. To me, that's kind of trivial, you know. But to analyze more on how the message is being put across and interpreted by the researcher.
Mm-hmm.
So now you establish the relationship between the text and the researcher, not just a researcher and the director, or director, text, and researcher. You know, if you focus maybe on text itself, then maybe you won't have to deal with questions about realism, you know, or because when you balance realism with something like artistic analysis, that can somehow be tricky and might lead you to writing too much but unnecessary for a writing project.
And I think Chill's question doesn't have to do much with realism. He mentioned realism, but his question was about whether I've analyzed a movie focusing on the narrative, the story, or the artistic aspects. And of course, it's important to talk about both. It's not relevant at all. But like, I mean, I gave the example of that, like $50 per night. It's trivial, I agree, but it's just something that I used as an example to demonstrate the point that as someone from that culture, you would be more understanding or knowledgeable about that. As for whether it's relevant to, okay, when I mentioned the three, I think I mentioned four, but the things, initial analysis is not as important as the in-depth analysis, and I'm not going to focus that much on like the director or like the context that much, but about the text itself, for sure, that is a course.
Well, just a follow-up about being an insider. There's also, I mean, this maybe is for everyone as well, and I'm not saying I'm an expert, but as I understand, if we do sociology or if we do textual analysis, being an insider also has its downside, you know, because some elements that you might recognize as something is too familiar, and maybe you might not recognize as much as an outsider.
True.
So I think the best way to do it is not just performing as an insider. So when you analyze this kind of text, you also try to detach yourself. So you're an insider and an outsider at the same time. You know, this is also similar methodology that we do for participant observation. So for example, of course, if you're an insider, you have an advantage. You have the language advantage, you have the culture advantage, but that also comes with the responsibility of recognizing the weakness of that advantage. Because being too familiar about something does not make you a better interpreter or a better analyst of that particular phenomenon. So the thing is that even if you're an insider, you have to make sure that you're also an outsider at the same time, so that you can have a better engagement with the text.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the defamiliarization process in like qualitative research, and being an insider, of course, has an edge, an advantage, but at the same time, we just need to be aware that we always have to look at things from different angles and perspectives, and always try to remind ourselves as a neutral researcher first.
Other questions? Other questions? We can come back at the very end. But several points. One is that the initial concern is on this impact. Who knows if
I just wanted to take a piece of paper.
don't be nervous.
You can take everything.
Okay. Initially, you were concerned about the impact brought by this Doi Moi policies on society, especially the most marginalized people, like most the people in the most precarious conditions. So you focus on the three group of people. But you are also interested in or concerned with the film director's interpretation. You would say that that interpretation and that reflection of the society or the changes of society might not be the same as a history book or the governmental report, okay, or the socialistic statistics and so on. So you get a different version of this historiography. So this is your initial concern, right?
Yeah.
then, of course, what Fernan challenge might be a question you could consider, but does not need to limit you, right? Because you are still looking at mainly this filmic reality or filmic presentation. That is the artistic presentation, but that doesn't mean they are all the truth or the fact. You need to differentiate their content. For example, doctoral filmmakers and so on, right? So you are also pointing to their analysis, their critique, but at the same time you are showing how they diverse or differ from one another because of their own personal position or their own background. So that might be interesting, okay? But I still think it is not very persuasive not to include documentaries. Bringing in documentaries doesn't mean they present the fact or the truth, but they are also artistic intervention. Perhaps they could show some dialogue between this filmic interpretation and so on, as long as you could choose a good documentary. So, but you are on this process. You don't shut the door to some good documentaries. Okay, there might be an exciting realm, a different door, of course, that might complicate your argumentation, but that might enrich your finding. But of course, the gap between the film and reality, it is not an empirical gap, but different perspectives. Okay, so we need to interpret those perspectives. So that would already be interesting. There might be other things, but I like Han's approach to allow the film guide her research and allow herself to modify her project and revise her hypothesis. Okay, this is just like when you do fieldwork, you allow this the field to take you into your project. You do not impose or presume some finding, and then you do that through your interpretation. Okay, so we need to observe. That is, we learn through the research more in-depth so-called reality, because reality is not just one blank surface. Filmic interpretation also is the reality you want to discuss. So, yeah, let's stop for now. And Kasha, you want to come? We still can come back to Han's project in the end. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll take a break after.
Just
2 minutes? Then you prepare your stuff and then you'll check on yours. Take notes, and if you have questions, you still can raise them at the end of this today's forum. Okay. Maybe you can bring out your own project and ask them how do they respond to your question. All right.
But for the projector,
Projector.
slide is please make up the period.
Okay, sure. We'll take a break after Kasha's talk, and then we'll continue with Lungani and Mark. You lead the way, and they don't follow you.
Yeah, I did not expect that. So how are you?
Nervous.
Can we also just share a bit? I mean, because if we have like 20 minutes during a defense, I mean, it's better if you prepare like an outline or a script so that you keep yourself in 20 minutes, because it's really important during defense that you limit yourself and maximize the time.
Or if you are very nervous.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, they are also sharing the skills of their presentation. Okay. Either in their thesis defense, proposal defense, or in their presentation, right, in conferences. Always it will be good to have a script and also PowerPoint. Okay. All right, Kasha, introduce yourself and then your project.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katarzyna. I'm from Poland, and I am a second-year PhD student here in the SRCS Institute. And today, I'm still quite early in my research. Today, I will briefly talk about my research project, which is about online misogyny and anti-feminism in Poland and South Korea, which is Atlantic studies. And I will also talk about the ethical issues in social media research, because this is something that actually now I'm dealing with when analyzing my data. And to be honest, it is more complicated than I thought it would be. There's like so many issues and regulations that you have to follow. So I thought that it might be also interesting for you to be aware if you are applying for social media or internet studies. And I will also mention a little bit about the gender-based online harassment, like already existing studies, and I will present like 3 theories that are very often applied to not only gender-based but to online harassment in general. So maybe you can also use them, of course, for other research in other fields. Okay. So first, in my research, I aim to analyze online misogyny and anti-feminism in Poland and South Korea. The online misogyny is treated as the expression of prejudice and hostility toward women that is carried through the technology as the medium, but with the thought that the technology itself did not create this discriminatory practice. So the online misogyny mirrors society's acceptability and its use of these practices. Additionally, it can also extend these limits by reproducing the discourse that is officially not approved. And you have probably noticed that people sometimes talk about the internet as if it's something that existed in a completely different dimension, or that online communities are separate from real ones. But the online communities are real social entities, and are rooted in our social context. So, because the internet is closely related to real social patterns, the social context must be taken into account, as they help explain like topological features of networks, of interaction and communication. So there are some researchers, like Mr. Katie and Van Hassel, argue that without taking cultural, political and historical context into account, important aspect of social media use and its social implication might be missed. So social media should be studied as the extension of daily life. In the same online misogyny also should be treated as the extension of misogynistic practices that are visible in our society. So in my research, I'm trying to fill this gap in the online-offline gap in the research about social media. So in order to understand what constitutes the online misogyny and anti-feminism, I also analyzed the historical and social cultural background that produced this a certain set of prejudices and stereotypes, which is later reproduced online. And additionally, it is hypothesized that the growth of misogyny and anti-feminism online can be observed due to the growing social and political polarization, regardless of country radicalization or liberalization in social matters. So for instance, like in Poland now we have quite conservative party ruling, and there's some radicalization. So for instance, last year they tightened the abortion law, which was already one of the strictest in the whole EU, while in Korea, 2019 order decided to decriminalize abortion. So there's some liberalization. However, the misogyny and gender wars online, whether or not there is radicalization or liberalization, are still growing. Okay, so as my research focused on social media, we can start with some definition around social media. And there are a few formal social media definition. For instance, Gross and all define social media as any website or web-based service that includes Web 2.0 characteristics and contains some aspect of user-generated content. 3 describes social media simply as a form of computer-mediated communication, and McCain stated that social media are web-based services that allow individuals, communities, or organizations to collaborate, connect, interact, and build community by enabling them to create, co-create, modify, share, engage with user-generated content. This is easily accessible. So there are also several types of social media, like social networking sites or social networking platforms, bookmarking, microblogging, blogs, forums, media sharing, social news, collaborative, authoring, web conferencing, geolocation-based sites, scheduling, and meeting. And of course, the definition, the type itself depends on the researcher, so it's not stable, it changes. For my research, I'm planning to focus on social networking site, Facebook, as it is one of the most popular online platforms in Poland. I don't think in Korea it is that popular, but still there are millions of users that are posting and using it. And the Facebook policy requires users to sign in under their real name. So people are usually more willing to use their real name when they post something publicly and express their opinion if a certain limit of acceptance of this beliefs, opinion is necessary. So it is quite interesting and terrifying to see that now more people are willing to post really discriminatory comments under their real name. So we can see that sometimes they happen in Poland, so there's not that much consequence. I also want to look at social news. In case of Korea, I'm going to look at Nguyê. This is known for its extremist opinion, views, comments, and probably Wykop in Poland, which is not that extreme. In the case of Poland, the extremist forums or sites, they belong to really extremist group. And in my research, I would prefer to focus and analyze websites that are popular among general users, not the members of one group. Because if I'm entering a forum that belongs to this group, extremist group, I can already expect that I should already expect what I can find there. But here it's many different people who are just using the very popular site, different backgrounds. And I'm also thinking not that one should be micro-blogging. So to analyze Twitter, as Twitter allows the user to use nicknames. But Twitter has a policy about using the data that actually can complicate some stuff. I will later mention it. So, yeah, just like this. Okay, so many scholars, they focus on one particular website, which is like kind of, at least for now, in this stage that I am now, I try to analyze a few different types of social media platforms in order to give maybe a wider sense of the multi-platform discursive style. So also for gathering data, which I am just like now in the process of that. So for now I am doing this manually, which is very time consuming. I'm still not using any software, so I'm actually hoping that Fernan can introduce some good one for me. Because like I would be dealing with like deep data, so using software would be like very helpful, but there are some issues that can complicate the process because like I am dealing with websites that can post some extreme content, and some software they gather the data based on the keywords or other settings. So there were some issues when the software gathered the illegal context like child pornography or something like this. And you cannot have this on your computer to like research. This is completely illegal. So manually it is time consuming now, but at least it is more safe. I know what I'm taking, what is happening. So this is something that you also have to remember if you want to do internet study or social media study. That there's like a lot of software which is like very useful to do this. But be very careful what this software is doing gathering. Because if there's some illegal content, you really may have legal problems. Okay, so yeah, now let's talk a little bit about this ethical issue in social media that now I am also dealing with. So when doing research that deals with human subject, there will always be some ethical issue. Like what is okay to do, what is not okay to do, is it legal, and even if it is legal, does it mean it's ethical? So you really have to think a lot as a researcher. And social media reflects on many aspects of everyday life. So it has vast quantities of naturally occurring data on like many topics. There are political news there, attitudes toward animal rights, consumers' behavior. So there's like a lot of data. And this gives the researcher a huge opportunity to gather the data that normally would be very hard. However, there are some challenges for ethical standards. So many scholars mention that traditional ethics frameworks can be useful to some extent in social media or internet studies, but the data received from online brings also new contextual challenges. And of course, there are some guidelines that will help you navigate through that. The Association of Internet Researchers, I think they post every year and guidelines how to deal with the data gathered online. But there are also legal regulations that you have to follow. For instance, the General Data Protection Regulation that regulates how the data can be used, how it can be gathered, what can be used, and so on in the EU territory. There's also the Korean Communication Commission that also regulates website contents and data. And when doing like international studies, which I'm planning to do, you actually have to look at like both sides. And additionally, we are in Thailand, so I still have to like cooperate with the Ethics Commission here at the university. So there's like a lot to do. But here I would like to talk about three issues that are mostly debated in social media research. Okay, so it's informed consent, anonymity, confidentiality, and avoidance of personalized social harm. Okay, so first, informed consent. When obtaining informed consent from the participant, they must, of course, agree to be a part of your research, understand what you are doing, and how the data will be used. in traditional research, usually it is more easy to do. But in online research, the public-private division is not that big. So like, do we always need informed consent for online research? And there are two main views on that. One saying that it is not necessary if the information is shared on a public platform without any restriction. But if there are some restriction, it will be considered private. For instance, a Facebook group that has some membership restriction, if you are part of this group, but you want to use the data, you still should ask for the consent from the members, because it is considered private. But if on Facebook there's the open discussion in which people publicly write comments and their opinion, this can be considered be public, so you don't need to ask. Okay? So this is one of the views. Another view is that the researcher should always try to obtain informed consent from people whose information is being used. And again, this can be tricky in the internet studies because it's actually impossible to get this consent from all the users that you are trying to get the data from. This one. And two, when dealing with sensitive topics, which can be like misogyny, Nazism, migrant workers, refugees, so on, you can put yourself as a researcher and other people that you already have interviewed in a very correct position. Because some of the groups, especially if you are dealing with the extremes group, the chances that they will allow you, will give you the consent are very low. And then also can get the information from your research, and it happened in the US that they just come back to the researcher and then harass them or the groups that were interviewed. So this is like a tricky part. Second issue is connected to anonymity and confidentiality. So according to some ethical requirements, researchers should ensure no one knows who has said what in a report, and participant information should be securely stored and shared. So again, with traditional forms of research, usually you anonymize data. But when working with social media data, anonymizing is more complex because the procedures are still evolving, especially with big data. And some platforms actually require that you should republish only in original form. For instance, Twitter has this policy that if you put a tweet, you should use the username and also the link to the page, which, according to ethical guidelines, usually implicit to not do this. So this is where it's getting very tricky again. Right. Especially this is important when, again, your data is about sensitive topics. The last concern is related to avoidance of personal and social harm, so its main goal is to avoid or at least minimize the risk of harm. So it is again related to the concept of identity, anonymity, and the risk that researchers can potentially place on participants or even themselves. Right, so these are the three issues that I am now dealing with the website that I'm analyzing. It was like Facebook is a policy that you have to put your real name. So if it's like open, I can use it. If it's like a closed group, I cannot use it. Twitter, of course, that you can use nickname, but should put the link to the user's account. But ethical guidelines say not to do this. Right? Then this website, they call people sometimes are posting under their real name, sometimes under nicknames, sometimes it's anonymous. So there's like a lot of that data, which at first I was like very heavy. I can get it easily. Now I'm trying to think like how to actually deal with this because it's a lot, especially for like us now doing this manually. Okay, so now I'll talk briefly about like gender-based online harassment. That is actually like my topic. The research that I've already done. So early media scholars believe that the internet would be an egalitarian space, that traditional hierarchies and social structures wouldn't be the internet will provide a safe space for everyone. Right? However, it turned out that the internet just reconstructs the common stereotypes and power relations. So cyberspace not only mirrors the social power relation, but also provides a new way and straighten the old ways of discrimination. And the misogynistic discourse, comments, posts are easily noticeable on extremist websites, but are not limited to this website. Popular online platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, which officially condemn this kind of behavior, actually informs in comments. So like in recent years, women feminists have started using the internet, social media as channels for mobilization, and together with the growing visibility of women, the misogynistic sentiment follow. Like I would say that on Polish cyberspace, the gender wars are still not that big as sometimes I can see on Korean websites. And we don't also have any very strong feminist group that enter the cyberspace, which Korea they have Lungani Hlongwa, who's implicated the name of feminist. So when I was like reading, there's like many scholars works analyzing online misogyny and anti-feminism. Many of them still focus on US or UK, so this is like very Anglosphere situation, and they don't really focus on any social context. They're strictly looking at this online context, which is why I'm trying to fit into this offline-online gap. You cannot analyze online sphere without thinking about the like real world kind. But while I was reading some scholarly works, often like 3 methods were applied to analyze an online harassment, not only like gender-based in general. But I would like to introduce because I feel like maybe you can use them helpful. So these 3 methods are critical discourse analysis, sentiment analysis, and grounded theory. So critical discourse analysis was developed in normal law, and it analyzes how language constitutes social reality and how socio-cultural practices influence the discourse. So this method is useful to interpret the data when you focus particularly on ideology or some identity construction, and it focuses on how these ideologies and power relations are produced, reflected, and negotiated through the language. So this is the method that I am currently following, at least for what now. I have maybe later change, because in my research project I aim to answer research questions such as what are the attributes of misogynistic and anti-feminist discourse online? Do the online misogyny and anti-feminist contribute to the normalization of hate speech? What factors are contributing to online misogyny and anti-feminist discourse? Like, what is the relationship between online and offline misogynistic and anti-feminist attitudes and practices? So, at least for now, this methodology seems appropriate for my study, as it can analyze how language constitutes social reality and vice versa. Because one of the aim of my research is to analyze the factors and practices that contribute to the growth of online misogyny. And another one which is like very often, especially when dealing with cyberbullying or stuff, personal decent trend analysis, which is used to determine the emotional tone behind the textual data. And it is used to gain an understanding of the opinion, attitudes, or emotion expressed online. So it allows you to collect an overview of like wider public opinion. And many studies are tried in relation to cyberbullying. They analyze insulting and offensive comments on online platforms. And the last one, grounded theory, is the theory that I am currently reading about this. So I did it last week. While I was reading a phrase another's PhD dissertation about misogyny, they use this theory, which seems like very interesting, but I am still not very familiar lists that may be interested. So grounded theory was developed by Clayton Strauss, and it explained how theory can be constructed from data systematically obtained and analyzed using comparative analysis. So the research is kind of like moving in and out of the data collection and analysis process. And through this theory, the researcher conceptualized the latent social patterns and structures of the research area of interest through the process of constant comparison. So here, this is kind of like opposite, because usually we have some questions about how it works, why it is happening, that we would like to answer. We look at how we can do answer and gather the data. The data might fit or not, we change the question. But this one actually suggests to first get your data, and based on the data, when you are looking for some patterns, you can formulate some very general questions. You gather more data, analyze with the previous one, and that way the data is kind of like pushing you into the direction of theory and to what question you should formulate. So it seems like very useful data. So it's all okay. It's a reference. Thank you.
So let's start our questions. First of all, apparently social media, online social behaviors or social reality, there is something that we need to confront, right? It's happening and it's prevailing in this life, real society. So how to deal with this is a question that Kasia has to and also she also needs to find appropriate methodology. This is something that we all need to go through because it's not single one methodology that will fit for all. So there's no way or no use to just teach a methodology because your project varies and you need to search the methodology. Really various methodologies that can help you to support your argument and so on. So there are a lot of try, fail, and redo it process. Those ethical issues also are very important, right? It's so different from literary text or even film. We also need to check the copyright. But for interviews, in old days we interview, right? We go to the field, we go to the villages, we interview them, and we also need to get their consent. Okay, but for that, we don't just take it as its big value because all interviews, even if it's over history, they have things they hide. Okay, they have things they distort, they unknowingly. Okay, so interview data already is very tricky thing. Not to mention this online checks. Okay, and how to use them. This requires very careful, critical observations and so on. And learning from other people's research might help. But a lot of it still needs to be discovered through your own research. That's it. Questions from students? I believe there are students working on social media, online data. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for late. I wish I could come early. But your project is anti-feminism in Poland and South Korea. I came from South Korea.
You want to converse in Korean? Go ahead.
So, think I should listen first. But did you observe any forum, any Korean forum or any social media as your first source data? What kind of community or any BBS web forum that did you observe for your research?
Yes, so I actually focus on like Nguyê, at that, and I also thought about DC inside, but I'm not really looking at this only like the Nguyê community.
Because actually Nguyê and DC and DC inside is quite different.
Yeah.
But Nguyê is actually most users are males. So actually there's no conflict or bullying because they just play by themselves. There's no place for female users. And DC inside, you know, there's thousands of BBS belongs to DC inside, and some of BBS, the forum or so-called branch, it is actually also occupied by male users, but some BBS, for example, some K-pop stars BBS, it is also occupied by female users. So actually, it is. I'm just interested how you see the conflict in which area. Because there's if there's a conflict, there should be males and females in same area at the same time. But
I'm not really analyzing like the conflict online between like this like gender wars. I will look mostly on like male posts that express some like misogynistic or feminist attitudes. So like the fact that it is mostly constructed from male users, it just gives like more data. Of course, like it would be also good if there are some female users.
Yeah, female users, and there are some also. I'm not sure they still have it or not. They have some branch in Nguyê. There's also branch BBS for homosexual, like a gay and lesbian place. I mean, it looks like some dilemma.
Yeah, I haven't looked at like that substance or something, but I will check or something.
Other questions? I just have like, I know like this is like you're still in the process of developing, but I think you need to like focus more on why Poland and Korea.
Oh yeah, I will also explain stuff.
Okay, and I was just also kind of confused, like whether the main focus is like gender, like vis-a-vis online misogyny, or are you going to focus more on the social, like the internet aspect of it? Because both the spheres are so large, like if you like focus on both of them, like you might have like a really diverse like research area.
Yeah, it would be like you. So no, for at least what I'm doing now, like it's main focus like online, right? But I cannot completely exclude like the offline situation because this social content create some attitudes that later you see online. But online just didn't create this. There's stereotypes about female, like very often in Polish websites you can see that they say, oh, we are not like Polish enough. So this is coming from the like even occupation time when they create these stereotypes, what constitutes like being female in Poland. So I also have to, this will not be like the main focus, but I have to kind of like understand how these attitudes come to life, right? Like why they're saying certain, like in Poland and South Korea, which was quite interesting. Misogyny is also connected to nationality development, but this is something that we have been very thorough.
Other questions, comments from the both of you? Yeah.
You just mentioned nationalism.
Yeah.
And do you think there's some Korean specific nationalism can be found on online space?
Korean.
Like what's the difference In Poland, there's also nationalism online. But what's your idea that some differences between the Polish and Korean?
Nationally.
Yeah.
Right.
When it comes to nationalism, especially online.
Yeah. So for in South Korea, nationalism is very connected, like also like historical and like your neighbors, like Japan and so on. In Poland, the nationalism is very connected to religion, which I haven't found really in Korea. Maybe like some old traditional say that the connection might be Confucian or something, but in Poland, Christianity is like very important. And same like during the occupation time, the nation and religion were kind of like connected. So the nationalized, like now there's this sort of like Polish, like being Catholic.
And also the last question, is it, it's being, because as you know, in Korea, every man technically needs to go to do the military service. Is it also mandatory in Poland?
Not anymore. It was
Since
like maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe even like longer, but not anymore. It's just like they still have to go to meet the committee and get tested if, just in the case of war, they can go. But now it's more if you want, you go. And it's also not that long, right? In Korea it's like 2 years.
it's 2 years.
Yeah, that's a very long time. In Poland, even if you go willingly, it is 9 months.
It was 9 months.
Yeah, and now also if you don't.
So it was
pursue
not
any
it was not very big burden for you.
No. This is like in Korea, this is like very kind of sensitive topic.
Sensitive, but it's quite strong because some feminists, not the many people in Korea, they share the one idea that if we cannot resolve this military service problem, then feminism cannot. It will be just ideal forever. Cannot be 实现. So
Yeah. So in Poland, it was never an issue. The same also like for female, it was like okay to enter the army. And
so it's not very violent.
No. We actually have like one of the worst armies because like after they ended the conflict. Sorry.
Because nowadays, because there was an election 2 weeks ago in Korea, and more than 70% of Korean male in 20, they voted Conservative Party, not because they like progressive, but because they think they are losing something from females, because they need and they call some females as a free rider. They don't do they don't take any responsibility and they just get rights. And those gender conflict and those misogyny is I think is becoming more pessimistic and again. It's getting worse and worse. So I like your agenda.
Thank you so much.
Can you go to the methods, the 3 methods, please? The grounded theory, yes. Okay, I have one comment and only one question. So the comment is that these approaches, these theories, these methods don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
They actually fit quite well together, being used alongside one another. Like you could use like grounded theory is like you come up with a theory that is grounded in your data, and then these data come from like your discourse analysis and your sentiment analysis, which is language basically. Which leads me to the question of how can we make sure, or how can we justify that sentiment analysis or discourse analysis are trustworthy enough, for example, because like this is we are talking about analyzing language online, right? So, for example, if someone is being sarcastic, and you know that sarcasm is already, it has to be grounded in a context so that it would be detected, right? And something like that is quite difficult to detect
Yes,
online with only words. So what can we do in order to like?
This is actually the issue that I'm also struggling with. So you are right, and there are many comments that were treated as discriminatory, and the authors were exposed by some like other websites, and they actually defend themselves like that. Oh, it was just sarcasm. I didn't mean it. So this is like very tricky situation. Like if you post something, but online is also harder to detect sarcasm. If you don't feel that one of the voice, you don't know who you are talking with. Don't say a facial expression. So yeah, once it can be really sarcasm, but on another hand, it can be just easy way to explain. So, oh, I'm not racist, I'm not homophobic. It was just a sarcasm, it was a joke. And quite often, it is an explanation. It was just a joke.
No, sarcasm is just one example. I mean, in general, it's language, right? And even if it's spoken in front of you, it's quite subjective. If you're analyzing something, it's quite subjective. Do we? I guess I'm asking. Do we have to justify our analysis of this language?
Can I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, also good.
Yeah.
I think the point is, well, maybe I can answer in your behalf. That's the point of doing qualitative research. You know, I mean, it's qualitative, which means there's this relationship between the researcher and the data. So all you need to do, I think, in response to doing discourse analysis or sentiments analysis, is you explain or you justify how you assign value to the data. Like, for example, of course, it might be hard to determine sarcasm whenever it's written in a text, but of course, sometimes you'll have a feeling that, oh, this is sarcastic. I mean, come on, when somebody says something sarcastic, you might have a hint of sarcasm there, you know, or it could be a joke. But in cases that we miss that out, I don't think it really matters so much, because if you miss the point of sarcasm, then you still go back to how you assign values to your data. Because in discourse analysis, of course, affect is important. It shapes the discourse, it shapes the threads, conversations in online communities. But at the end of the day, it still depends on the researcher on how you put values and how you put this messages together to come up with your argument of what's happening there. Because your role as a researcher is to give interpretation or analysis of what you see is in the discourse or present in that discourse. So regardless of the intention of whoever spoke it, but you know, what you want to see is the relationship between elements that are present in that particular discourse, that maybe on that end you are already contributing an analytical research to whatever topic you are doing.
All right, just a brief remark before we take our break. We are dealing with language, text, right? But behind this language, of course, there are how we have discussed for a long time: discourse, rhetoric, ideology, formation of all this. Okay, social relations that's hidden in this language. So whether it's homophobic, racist, or xenophobic, or whatever it is, okay, we need to read. It is not actually social media, or as we have said, okay, it's an extension from social reality, social context, social relations. So the reciprocal, right, relation between this online behavior, online phenomenon, and also social reality, because the action may take place, or that can agitate whatever it is in reality. But the other thing is that I find that you might need to try to focus. Whether misogynist behavior and anti-feminism, they have the same category. I mean, the thing about don't want you to answer now. And also when you say online harassment or bully and so on, and this conservative mentality and this men haters, women haters, you want to interpret the formation of this attitude and mentality, then also need to go back to your social context and history. And then that would, of course, involve a lot of aspects. So try to think what is a core question you want to discuss and debate in this project. In the very beginning, you said, me too. Okay, you started from there, and then you will try to run and cover a larger terrain. And now, what is the most important thing? Okay, the transition between this online discourse with this social reality, even in the parliament, or in another company, and so on, or what? Try to maybe focus. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 4 o'clock. Right, and we'll start from Lungani and Fernan with shorter questions.
Before
we begin, I think this is a very interesting occasion that people are here. Right? We have new students from the doctoral program and also new students from this Inter-Asia Cultural Studies and also students and new students. We are recording this forum, and also I believe our speakers will be happy to leave their PowerPoint with us. So we will again post it either on my class website, and also we can ask Antonina to help to upload. Okay, the video with the PowerPoint. Maybe we need to have a section just specifically on doctor-student project and methodology and so on, so that we can accumulate and people can learn from their offering, all right? So unless you have any reservation, okay, otherwise I think it's always good to share, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Professor
Yes.
and fellow classmates. Today I'll be presenting part of my topic, which is China's Maritime Silk Road Initiative, which I argue is a quest for seapower. So basically my presentation will focus briefly on my theoretical standpoint and then how I go about using the methodology that I'm going to show today to prove or to show that indeed the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is a quest for seapower. What I'm going to talk about today briefly is the background of the Maritime Silk Road Initiative. I'm going to talk about my thesis statement, and then I'm going to outline my theoretical concepts, and then I'm going to focus mostly on the methodology and how I extract data from an online source, which is called UN Comtrade. So just a little bit of background about the Maritime Silk Road Initiative. It was announced in 2013 by Chinese President Xi Jinping during his visit to Indonesia. It is a transcontinental trade network between Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Europe. And there are also plans to extend the initiative to other parts of the world, such as Latin America and Oceania. And to the imagination, the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is based on the ancient Silk Road, which were land routes and maritime routes which connected east and west from the 2nd century BCE to the 18th century. It involves infrastructural construction, mostly financed by China, and globally around $1.3 trillion has been extended towards financing infrastructure, and over $570 billion in loans has been issued mostly by Chinese banks financing infrastructure projects across Maritime Silk Road Initiative countries. And actually this like the amount of money that has been extended for loans has been widely criticized. Some people claim that China is using what is called debt trap diplomacy to trap poorer countries into debt. Some scholars point to the fact that like a lot of these countries that China lends money to cannot really afford to pay the money back. So some argue that it's actually a strategy for China to sort of like gain access and control for their resources. One classical example of this is there was a port in Sri Lanka that was financed and constructed by a Chinese company, and then the Sri Lankan government couldn't pay for this port, and so China obtained a 99-year lease of this port. So a lot of scholars cite this as like a sort of like a strategy of debt trap diplomacy. In the academic literature, the Maritime Silk Road Initiative has elicited different responses, which can broadly be categorized as critics and defenders. So basically, the critics argue that the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is China's global strategy to pursue power, to pursue global hegemony. And the defenders, on the other hand, say that no, the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is just a strategy for global cooperation. It has win-win ideals to it. There's no military, there are no military intentions or political intentions behind it. So I find the truth to be somewhere in between. I don't really buy either one of these two sides. And yeah, so my research is still ongoing as well, but so far, yeah, so I'm more or less in the middle. So this is the map of the Maritime Silk Road Initiative and the Belt and Road, the Silk Road Economic Belt. So there are basically two roads. The one is the overland route, which is presented in green, as you can see the cursor. Okay, so the green one, or the dark green one, is the Silk Road Economic Belt, which passes through China and a lot of Central Asian countries, the Middle East, Moscow, and then the ultimate destination is Europe. So that's the Silk Road Economic Belt. And then the blue is a maritime route which passes through the South China Sea. It touches on several countries in Southeast Asia, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and then it passes through the Malacca Strait and then into the Indian Ocean. And then it also touches on East Africa through the Gulf of Aden, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and also the ultimate destination is Europe. So as you can see, it's quite a global initiative. It involves like over 100 countries, and it actually passes through some of the most politically unstable countries in the world. Some of them are they're considered failed states, to be honest. And so part of the challenge for China is to negotiate a way with these countries to see how they can make it work. So collectively, the Silk Road Economic Belt above and the Maritime Silk Road Initiative below are collectively known as the Belt and Road Initiative. The old name for that was the One Belt, One Road, and it was changed along the way. And there are actually some good reasons why it was changed, but I'm still researching into that. But apparently it was to sort of like euphemize the initiative, not to make it sound too colonial, like to remove the colonial sentiments attached to this initiative. So what are the limitations that I've identified so far? Well, there are three basic limitations that I've identified, and these are the limitations that offer me a platform to intervene. So the first limitation is that students of the Maritime Silk Road Initiative often analyze it alongside the Silk Road Economic Belt. However, these two have different socio-economic and political challenges. Actually, some authors strongly advise against analyzing them collectively. We should, depending on your analysis, it is better to isolate them and then analyze one initiative at a time. And then the second limitation is that scholars tend to shun theoretical lenses from geopolitics and international relations. So in the literature, most scholars just tend to analyze like, what are the implications of the Maritime Silk Road Initiative on specific countries, or like what are the implications maybe on a geopolitical scale. But generally speaking, scholars tend to shun theoretical lenses. And so the third limitation is that most scholars also lack a thorough political economic analysis of the initiative. And so collectively, these three limitations are sort of like the theoretical gap that I wish to address. So what is my core argument then? It is that the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is a global assemblage for pursuing sea power by operationalizing maritime logistics as a strategic conduit for power projection. It sounds like a mouthful, but when you break it down, it makes sense to me. I hope it can make sense to you as well. What I basically have to explain in my study is what is sea power, what exactly do I mean by sea power, and how does maritime logistics feature into this sea power equation. And in order for me to do that, I'm making use of some of the scholars that I read like during my courses here. For example, I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, Brett Nielsen, Sandro Mesadra, and a lot of other critical logistics scholars. They're talking about how to understand logistics as an element of power. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to merge two disciplines together to sort of like to see how they can communicate with one another. Because sea power theory is rather limited in terms of its other constituents. Sea power is quite a broad concept. However, so far it has mostly focused on the military side. Most people, when they hear of sea power, they think of the military or the Navy. But it's actually much bigger than that. It involves logistics, it involves geography, culture. So I'm trying to use critical logistics to sort of explain how maritime logistics functions as a conduit for power projection. Just briefly, what is sea power? It is a theory that explains how states pursue maritime power by using the sea as an asset. And one of the most prominent theorists of sea power was Alfred Mahan, who's considered to be the founding father of sea power. He developed sea power theory to explain how small states, for example Britain, used sea power to build empires. So for example, if you think of the British Empire, it was Britain itself is a small island state, and yet it was able to build one of the world's biggest empires, and they did so by using sea power, by extending itself, building ports around the world, and securing resources, securing sea lines of communication, and also protecting those sea lines of communication with their navies. So sea power, as I said, is like a mixture of logistics and ports and geopolitics, and then also the navy. So Mahan's sea power theory emphasizes the intricate connection between maritime trade and the navy. However, for him, sea power was also centered on winning decisive battles at sea. So he was a 19th and 20th century naval theorist, and sea power has changed a lot since then. Nowadays, it's not really about decisive battles at sea. We hardly read of navies colliding at sea. So we need to rethink sea power in the 21st century. And that is where people like Geoffrey Till comes in. He has a book that talks about how to understand sea power in the 21st century. And for him, sea power is a much broader concept. All states, for him, have sea power by virtue of the ability to use the sea. So even small countries have sea power in that they provide, let's say, maybe the resources for building ships. Small countries also would have sea power if they provide insurance services for merchant ships. So for Geoffrey Till, sea power is a much broader concept, and this is what I'm also trying to use in my research, to think broader than just the Navy when I'm talking about sea power. So then what is my methodology? So having explained my theoretical standpoint that the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is a pursuit of sea power, and that logistics is the strategic conduit for pursuing sea power, I needed a methodology to show how logistics functions as power. And I came across this database created by the United Nations. It's called UN Comtrade. And basically what it does is it documents, it collects all trade data from all countries around the world. Maybe I can just show you briefly how it works for those who are interested. So here's the database. You can click on Get Data. And then you have several criteria here for filtering exactly what you're looking for. So let's say, for example, we're looking for, you have like selections here, goods, services. Let's choose goods. And then you can choose how you want to visualize the data, annual or monthly. I will stay with annual. And then these are different types of classifications. For now, I'll just recommend staying with the default criteria if you don't really know what these mean. So for example, let's say we're looking for data for the last 5 years. So you just click the years that you want to include. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then let's say we're looking for trade between, does anyone have any recommendations? India and Singapore?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So you just type India. So reporters, you want the data that is reported by India, right? Okay, and then not with the world, you want to see, sorry, I'm supposed to type Singapore here. Singapore. Okay, Singapore. And then here you have an option of choosing. Are you looking for imports, exports, or all trade? Okay, so then just select all. It's going to be quite an exhaustive list, so it's better to specify sometimes, like to say, like take it one step at a time. But let's try and see if it actually works. And then in this, so HS allows you to choose like the specific commodity that you're looking for. So let's say, I don't know, what is it? Spices. Okay. Yeah, there's quite a lot of different spices. So
Spices pepper.
Where?
The second one.
The second one?
Yes.
This one?
411, yep. 4090411.
This one. Okay, so let's see the trade between India and Singapore.
So it can show us not so exhaustive.
Yeah, okay. So we're looking for the last 5 years of data between India and Singapore, and we want to see trade flows in both directions, exports from India and also imports from Singapore. So before you actually download the data, you can choose to preview the data. You can say Get Data. And then, so you can also choose to see, okay. So in 2016, for example, so much money was spent by India, or was received in exports between Singapore and India. And you can actually download this data and you can compile really creative infographics, charts using Excel or other software. So it's quite an interesting and comprehensive database. It does have limitations because it doesn't have some of the latest data. But I think for me, like it was very useful in proving that indeed the Maritime Silk Road Initiative operationalizes logistics. It's about trade. It's about interconnectivity between China and Belt and Road countries. And so I was able to extract some data here, and then I compiled some of it, and I presented it in different charts. And using some of the data that I compiled from this, I was actually able to write a paper and got it published. So
can you choose something related to the project? China, Africa, and
okay.
either rare mineral or whatever it is the financials.
Okay, so for example, let's say trade between South Africa, which is not really, okay, let's choose another country.
Ethiopia?
So again? Ethiopia. Okay. Let's say Ethiopia and China. Imports or exports or all? Okay. Let's choose all. And then I would suspect that, okay, let me just choose or here, because I'm not really sure what commodities are being traded mostly between these two countries. So I'll just say all commodities, and then get data. Results too large, you do not have permission to. Oh, so this is the other disadvantage of using this database. If you want to extract like large quantities of data, you would have to have membership. So far, I don't really need to have membership because I just look at specific countries like one by one, and I try to minimize my search criteria to like imports or exports, or like maybe for a single year, and I can do this over and over again until I have like a large enough corpus of data.
Maybe limit a year. Let's see.
Okay, let's say the last 2 years. Let's see, look at data. Let's see. Do they trade?
It's a trade talks.
Oil, like Djibouti, so Ethiopia, Congo, it's
So let's say Sudan. Let's just say Sudan. Let's say exports. Exports. Let's say oil. And there's like tons of different oils. Like frozen oil. I'm interested in like crude oil, so I need to find. I don't know if anyone can see crude. Huh? It won't show. Let's see. Here. Sure it is. I think I saw it before. You just choose the commodity one and then.
Petroleum.
Yes.
Petroleum,
Just try this
yeah,
one.
sure.
Let's see what we get data. It can take quite a while to generate. Yeah, so in 2016, only 40, and then 2017, like over 23 million. So there's quite a huge amount of oil that's being exported. So I mean, using data like this, you can make claims and to say that the two countries are growing tighter together in terms of trade. For example, you can just like this is quite a significant statistic. In 1 year, there was quite a huge jump. And then if you have like, let's say maybe over a period of 10 years, you can construct like a trend line to show.
You can also show the curve.
Yes, yeah. So for those who are interested in like logistics or anything like that, I would highly recommend UN Comtrade data. I don't know if I have any other.
Choice is PowerPoint.
Is it keynote?
It's on the desktop.
Go back to your desktop.
Go to the bottom right, you'll see.
Yeah, so as I said, like today I just wanted to talk to you about this particular database. for those who are interested. And so basically, like the key takeaway from my presentation is that your theoretical point of view and your methodological choice, they need to correspond with one another. Yeah, so basically that's my presentation.
Questions? I have not seen how you prove your argument through the data you collect. Like you didn't show what are the data you want to select or focus in order to prove this quest for seapower. In what ways is the maritime cycle demonstrate the disposition of this quest? And so what data? But people can see that Lungani showed very good theoretical intervention and also definition of some this core key concept of this project, but we haven't seen how he persuades us through his collection of data. To briefly explain yourself.
Oh, so this was just a part of my my research. So I actually have 4 pillars that constitute what I call the quest for seapower. The first one is intellectual property. The second one is digitization. So basically, the third one is logistics, and then the fourth one is security. So these are the 4 pillars that I argue are being operationalized by the Maritime Silk Road Initiative to pursue seapower. And since there are different pillars, for example, logistics and intellectual property, to most people these two might sound very unrelated. But actually, when you think of what intellectual property does, like it enforces a certain market space. So, for example, if China wants to trade its goods with Sudan, then it is to China's interest to have a very strong intellectual property protection in Sudan. If China wants to trade with, let's say, Singapore, then it's also to China's interest to have a very strong intellectual property protection in that country. And the reason for that is because it creates sort of like a seamless movement of goods from China to that country. So intellectual property, to my mind, and logistics, they work together. One secures the market and the other one is basically the entrance of the I would say maybe the colonizing of local markets. I would have to collect different forms of data for each one of these pillars. For example, for logistics, I chose trade data, which was the point for today's discussion. So for the logistics pillar, I'm going to choose trade data. And then for intellectual property, I will look at some patents to see how, like what kind of patents are being filed. What are the deals that are being struck between China and Maritime Silk Road Initiative countries when it comes to intellectual property? So I need to look at different forms of data for each of these pillars. And for today's discussion, it was just the logistics part of it. Yeah.
Questions? Challenges?
It was pretty straightforward, so I don't have any questions at the moment.
Challenge. Now my curiosity or question would be, one thing is using this map or geoinfographic chart would be interesting, especially for Lungani's project. But in order to do that, he needs to show this map of this Silk Road Maritime initiative demonstrates there's a significant another point or a significant route for certain as you said, okay, quest for seapower. So the trade, the huge jump, for example, Sudan in 1916 to 1917, right? That shows something, and then we need to know from 16 to 17, 17 to 19, but that trade through which route, okay, and compared to other regions, whether there's African either underground resources, minerals, or rare minerals, right, for computer, that is increasing, and whether that correlate to this cyber network or this cyber control of security, right? And then whether that correlate to this seizing of intellectual property. In what way this intellectual property would reinforce this trade route and also reinforce this security control through the cyber network. So that then could make sense, right? Not to mention maybe military base and so on. But if you want to show it is one strategic move to quell or to enhance its control seapower, then the four different aspects you want to show, or different pillars, they should go together. Right? Should reinforce one another. And then you also need to focus or concentrate on, or to show that there's a very prominent pattern or chart on the map. So that is something that you can work on. It's workable? Okay. You promise. You're sure? Yeah, okay, Monica.
I'm sorry. I just want to mention that what's your argument? Because when you talk about the seapower strategy, security, or maritime Silk Road, or women cooperation, logistics, it seems very broad perspective. So which point you want to argue, which section you are going to take? If you talk about the military base or security or logistics, if you're not going to talk about that, okay, before that they were just talking about the security, and as they think that this is the sea power. But no, they also have logistics at that time, because the as you mentioned in the British time, they use sea power as also logistic. It's not something new. It's really from the British time or maybe before that. So I didn't get it. What's your argument with that research?
Very good question.
Okay. Yeah, very good question. Thank you for that. So let me just go back to, okay, here. I just wish to highlight again, like my core argument is that the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is a global assemblage for pursuing sea power by operationalizing. This is just one of the pillars that I have. I have three other pillars. By operationalizing intellectual property, maritime logistics, digitization, and then security. So the Maritime Silk Road Initiative itself is my unit of analysis. However, I'm analyzing four different yet intricately connected pillars that are being projected, or that hit the ground in specific sites along the Maritime Silk Road Initiative. So specifically, I want to analyze how Chinese sea power will impact on East Africa. Perhaps I missed that part. Like that's the crucial part of my my research. It's not just the Maritime Silk Road Initiative in totality, because it's too big. I cannot really grab the whole thing. So I just want to analyze how it impacts maybe a portion of East Africa or Northeast Africa, which is like a crucial, what is it, choke point, or like yeah, it's a vital. For example, you remember the news about the Suez Canal that was blocked by Italian. Yeah. So stuff like that are very interesting to me, to see like how, you know, that particular region of the world like is such an important node in the global supply chain. Yeah. So yeah, perhaps I didn't really stress it here, but I do have a focus to see like how does this particular region of the world feature into the bigger picture.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was also was like more interested. Are you looking also international relations things? How China pick up the countries that he has like relation with that country, like poor countries or the countries they pick up is like their relations with that country, how it is. So you're gonna focus on the international relations things. If you are going to talk about the East African section, so
yeah, I think that's also
because I think it's this point is most important. Like for example, they just why they didn't took any another country? Why this particular country for this Belt Route? So for me, it's seems like it's very strategic point, and it's kind of very international relations things that become very significant factor for this choice. So you're gonna take this point of like significance for that research?
Yeah. So international relations, sort of like international politics play quite an important role in my research. You know, I have to explain like why specific countries and why not others. For example, why the exclusion of the US? It's a strategic choice. So basically, this is my argument, and this is what it's not really my argument, but like I support scholars who make this argument that the Maritime Silk Road Initiative is trying to. Actually, when I talk about the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, sometimes I'm talking also the Belt and Road at large. So I think it is an attempt to create sort of like a co-center in the international system. Some people argue that it's actually a way to sort of like erase the US or like to overpower it. And some people argue that like a military conflict is inevitable between China and the US. I also need to analyze such things. So like international relations theory is quite important here.
Interesting.
Other questions? So here, one thing, of course, Lungani should demonstrate apparently that's in his mind, and also he's not going to do an overall comprehensive picture of this maritime Silk Road, but he wants to demonstrate how the quest of sea power in the 21st century is different from those in the 17th, 17th century or 19th and 20th century. So materialistically, technologically, strategically, how is it different? Okay, how is it this control of sea power, not only the land, not only taking the land, but through the sea? Why not the sky? Why not the cyberspace only? But why do you insist it is sea power? You need to support yourself. And also, why does it matter to you? Why does it matter to you? What is the stake? Okay, of course you chose East Africa. And also, apparently the Suez Canal is very crucial, right, starting from the early time. And also even from the French, British Empire switching to US, it's also Suez Canal with a Middle East location. And it's Djibouti, the gate. So you're from South Africa. So this is something that you want to know more, you want to investigate. But to investigate, you need to theoretically, you need to prove these 4 pillars. They go together and demonstrate a different form of technological, logistically strategy for request for seapower. Right? So how do you link this digital or cyber surveillance or security, and then there's a trade, and then intellectual property, and maybe military base and so on. How do they go really hand in hand, reinforcing one another, and not diverse samples? Diverse samples like a bunch of whatever. We cannot see the relation. We cannot see the focus, and we do not see how the argument build up from one to the other and concentrate on one point. Okay, so any other question? Maybe that should be enough for now. And
maybe you can also check on the MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding, because that's how they usually deal with this kind of things. Like for example, in the Philippines, a lot of things can be discovered about the Belt and Road through the MOU.
yeah, sure.
Because all the policies or the arrangements, everything is there. Then you can just see how it manifests on the data that you can collect from those websites that you show.
Yeah.
Actually, it's also relevant to everyone's project, because when we have such diverse overwhelming data, how do we select? How do we use some of them, a particular pattern of the data, to support our hypothesis? We need to have our hypothesis before we go out to search data, whether it's a film or online harassment or whatever it is, right? You have this provisional hypothesis, but then you need to correct yourself, and you need to modify your trajectories, but you need to show some focus. Yeah. But keep that in mind. Your core question or thesis is something you need to go back to, okay, whatever route you want to take. Yeah. All right? Okay, yeah. We can come back to discussion for overall later on. And
I hope I remember how she did it. Oh yeah. Should just press and press. Pressed.
Did you press this one?
Yeah, I just click on the
these students are all second year, right?
I'm
So
not.
this is, okay, you are, sorry. So reserve the
Working.
hardest question for now.
But I'd love to share details about my work, but I think that it is more helpful if I share how I do it instead of telling you the main topic that I study. But just a brief introduction as I set up. Oh, why is it done?
So it is good for you to see how they
Yes.
progress step by step, right? They still have maybe 2 years to go,
I hope
right?
it's
Or
this
3
one.
years, or 1.5 years, 1 year?
Well,
Then,
1 year and a half.
okay,
Yes.
okay. We need to make it very, very critical. Questions for him.
But just to give, oh, my name is Fernan. I mean, I think some of you did not know me since I've already finished my 4 courses. And I'm on my 3rd year, 2nd semester. I did my proposal defense, when? Last semester? Yes, it felt so
Yes.
long ago.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, last semester. And I'm at the stage, at the point of my research, wherein I have been collecting data, and that's how I found out about the software that I want to share with you. But please allow me, I have a script, because if I don't have a script, I talk too much. My friends know this. So I want to limit myself to 20 minutes. Yes, so let me just...
Make sure you share your screen or
Yes, it's
somewhere.
So my topic, my research topic is about populism in the Philippines, but most of my sources are coming from online sources. So maybe I can show you, so there you go, so.
Make sure 那个史迪威你看得到他的 screen 吗？
Oh, no, I don't think you can see it.
you are not logged in on Zoom?
Yes. Right. Forgot about that. But how do I do it? How do I join the call?
他帮你。
但是老师现在照相机直接
照相机。
那个Zoom。
But I should connect to Zoom here, so then I can share my screen. Oh yes, that can work too. It's nice to have you here now. Should probably close that first. On Zoom? They're using Google, I think. Okay. Stop sharing. It's using your camera.
可是这样子，它那个太远了吧，看不到。你看，看不到，还是应该。
Yeah, because I can only use my computer because it's installed in my computer.
I think it's better that you log in Zoom and then you share screen.
Okay. Let's see if my computer can handle that. No, there's a computer. There's a software in my computer, and I cannot install it here because I paid for it. But you cannot use two licenses in two different computers. Only have one license. Oh, I don't use my.
Let's wait for maybe a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes. Fernan is from Philippines. It's just
Oh, yes,
talk about background. Why do you talk about populism and why Philippines? Why? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I chose my topic because of the conditions these days, as I will share with you. I mean, I'm a sociologist and a historian, but I'm used to doing fieldwork, like going to communities, spending time with them, staying with them for a month or two, you know, those kind of things. But now I have to do everything remotely, and I chose my topic because of first practicality. You know, I mean, this kind of research, the one I will share with you, is something you can do wherever you are. And second, of course, our president is crazy. He does so many things that puzzles me. And despite all the blunders that he did during the pandemic, like the cases in the Philippines is so high, like the highest in Southeast Asia, probably we beat Indonesia, I think. But nothing to be proud of. But despite all those blunders, he's still so popular. So I want to understand, why is this person so popular? Like, even the daughter of this president is about to run next year. It's our presidential election next year. And apparently she's leading the polls. So, oh, I can hear my voice. Wow, I did not know I sounded like that. So yeah, so main reason, practicality, crazy president, and crazy people. So you have a big puzzle there.
He started out with this strongman's leader, there's a law for strongman in the Philippines, and also the history of this martial law or dictatorship, and through manipulating popular sentiment. Right? So those are the background of your. So you need to start from there.
All right. I'd love to start from there if I will be mainly talking about my topic, but for now, what I prepared is doing things, like the methodology or how I did the remote research. But if we'll have the time, I would love to share with you why, like for example, the long history, like how our president is actually replicating or innovating the techniques of former dictators or former strongmen. But yeah, for now, I'd like to stick to my script. So I hope you understand. Right. Okay. So uncertainty and insecurity have always been our reality. However, today we are forced to deal with these conditions like never before. New COVID-19 variants emerge, pandemic-related problems continue to spread and multiply, vaccine hesitancy, vaccine inequities, authoritarianism, and inequality are worsening in the global south. Cases of hate crimes and authoritarianism or even violence against Asians soar in the global north. 1 year after the pandemic declaration, borders remain closed and people's mobility remains limited and controlled. As COVID-19 continues to ravage economies and societies, planning our future has become more challenging. Each day, it becomes more apparent that it will take a while before the world completely defeats and overcomes the virus' lingering effects on individuals and societies. Nevertheless, as we live in a society with heightened sense of uncertainty and insecurity, we are compelled to continue with our lives. We respond and we move forward. For us researchers, this meant a number of adjustments. Adapting with uncertainties will imply rethinking our modes of engagement with our subjects and surroundings. Mainstream sociological methods that help us establish meaningful connections with the field will require redesigning. Research frameworks and theoretical approaches will have to be restructured and reassessed. As uncertainty remains the only certainty there is, now more than ever, we need to reaffirm our commitment to exploring new and creative forms of knowledge production. So, what kind of scientific research then can we conduct remotely? What methodologies and theoretical frameworks are most suitable for remote research? What technologies, materials, and sources are readily available for us? And how can we use them for social research? Needless to say, tell me if I'm going too fast, but I wanted to stick to 20 minutes. So needless to say, today's technology should help us take on the challenge of reimagining the field and reconfiguring our methodological practices. As the pandemic continues to limit researchers' movement, it makes practical sense to consider using digital research methods, especially for qualitative research. Cognizant of our limitations, we have to make do with what is accessible or available to us. That said, in the first part of my presentation, I will attempt to answer the following questions. First, what data can we extract from virtual environments? Second, what technical and behavioral considerations should we account for when analyzing subjects through and within digital platforms? And third, how can we effectively engage the field through computer-mediated communication? In the second part of my presentation, I wish to share software I use for my research. It's called Maxqda 2020. And it helps me organize, analyze, and visualize digital text and interview data. I think this is most helpful to you, Kasha, because it can also do, like this software, it can also do, it can import Twitter data, and then it can analyze big data. You can even visualize and follow, make certain, you can choose certain conditions there, which will limit or maybe expand your analysis. It even does sentiments analysis, so if I'll have the time, I'll try to do it. Okay, cool. But before I answer the questions I posed earlier, I first want to clarify that I do not claim that technology-aided projects such as virtual fieldwork or online ethnography are new. However, each year, as a young and developing field, one can encounter innovative approaches to digital research. They often introduce new remote research methods, constantly transforming our understanding of today's society. For starters, you may want to check Harvard Library's crowdsourced list of current digital research methods for qualitative research. The link is here. I'll share the slides with you maybe after the class, but you can click on it and there's a long list of methods or fieldwork techniques that you can maybe adopt for your own research.
Like in any research, as a rule of thumb, you must have an initial inventory of related materials and sources accessible and available to you before you conduct virtual fieldwork. As you already know, it is impossible to write good research without sufficient sources. With the abundance of available and accessible digital media text on various digital platforms, we are left with massive quantities of data for empirical analysis. Researchers who intend to analyze power relations, like myself, will find social media as a goldmine, for it provides tons of data on how people conduct themselves and others. People's engagement on the platform can also provide evidence on the constitution of the politics of truth in social networks. In digital spaces, we can also observe how people are continuously subjected to new surveillance technologies, and conversely, we can discover innovative and creative forms of resistance, which can all be studied in digital spaces. So there are three types of data, namely extant data, elicited data, and enacted data. I'm sure that you are aware of these terms, but allow me to highlight them here to better explain the challenges and the opportunities in conducting remote research and virtual fieldwork. So first, we go to extant data. Extant data are data sources that researchers had no hand in shaping. Examples are presidential speeches, archival documents, data sets from NGOs, news articles, among others. When examining extant data, one must be aware of its contextual positioning. So that's a keyword, contextual positioning. Asking the who, what, when, where, why, and how can establish their context. As Ralph, Burks, and Chapman in 2014 suggested, contextual positioning through interrogation provides a three-dimensional context to support analysis, namely the position of the extant data. Next is the position of the researcher, and the position of the extant data to both the researcher and the study. So here you just look into the relationship between the data and the researcher. So you have to be conscious with that. I will explain about handling such data later as I show you how to use Maxqda. But in the context of my research, examples of extant data are Facebook posts and threads, memes, tweets, or YouTube content. Meanwhile, elicited data involve an interpersonal interaction between the researcher and participants. Such data can be gathered through interviews, focus groups, or FGDs, and surveys. For remote research, like remote interviews, you must take into account your participants' time zones and locations. This has been very struggling for me. I sometimes schedule it wrong because I misunderstand like the time zones. So you have to be careful with that. Depending on your topic, your participants' environment may have varying influences on your yield. So you have to be conscious about the environment where your interviewee is. Like, is it a room? Is he surrounded by family members? Because sometimes being surrounded by other people might even affect what he or she can share with you. And just like in face-to-face interviews, you should also note your interviewee's nonverbal communication or body language. You have to take note of those cues. To establish rapport, it is helpful to determine your participants' literacy levels. Like in my case, I deal with different kinds of people. Like I talk to consumers of media texts who are tricycle drivers or jeepney drivers, or some are even like involved in the government. So you speak different languages with these people. So you have to be flexible. And you may also want to ask probing questions to understand your interview better. So you don't just stick to your questions. You might want to ask something beyond what you've written, based on your observation with who you are talking to. You can also share senscapes, like eat meals, even in remote conditions. You can share meals or drink tea together. And it might help your interviewee feel more comfortable. So those kind of things you might want to consider. For FGDs, or focus groups, you can take advantage of Zoom's breakout groups. I'm not sure if you're aware, but you can split into different groups there. For surveys, you may want to use free web-based software like Google Forms. I don't need to show you. I think you know Google Forms. To effectively utilize these technologies, however, you must recognize the limitations. Like, for example, technology-mediated interviews are often affected by factors such as respondents' limited understanding of technology, Like I had an experience, I was talking to two 70-year-old persons, and I had to take some time to orient them to the environment. So yeah. Also, some people will have privacy and safety concerns. So before you record something, you need to ask permission. Like you have to tell them, may I record this conversation? If I can record it, can I use the data that I can extract from this for my research? Those kind of things you have to also check. So finally, this is something that I'm not really used too much, but it's also helpful. You can have enacted data or data generated through non-traditional research channels such as games or immersive environments. Interaction with your participants could be facilitated through simulations, performative games, etc. By having shared experiences, now this is where the sociologists in us can come in. By having shared experiences, there's a chance that you'd be able to understand your subject's language, their gestures, symbols, behavior, and many more. So it's like a combination of participant observation, but you create the environment for you to have data that can help you for your analysis. Right. So in essence, when you conduct ethnographic research, I mean, not just online ethnography, but ethnography in general, you have to limit your scope by selecting field sites or by following people, things, metaphors, plots, lives, or conflicts in ways that may produce chains, paths, threads, conjunctions, or juxtapositions of locations. So it's just about limiting your scope. So that's the number one key. In doing online ethnography, one can treat online communities as field sites. Examples of these are Facebook groups and pages, Viber group chats for old people, a lot of Filipinos use this, and YouTube channels. Such an approach allowed me to observe platform cultures, governmental practices, and political participation daily. As I immerse in the field, I simultaneously collect extant data by taking screenshots of viral or controversial posts, because sometimes they're being taken down. So if the link is gone, you don't have evidence, so the best way to do it, have both. Take the link and then take a screenshot. So that's a safety precaution. And then back up your files, always, always. And you can also look into propaganda statements. So you take a screenshot of this, and these extant data can help you have an understanding of the promotion of the government, of the self, and others. So I also deep dive into the comment sections of various posts to observe political participation and social interactions. So this is where the discourse happens. So you look into those kind of environments. I also employ the same approach in YouTube channels. You can also take advantage of social media platforms' algorithm when locating your potential sources. For instance, in my case study, I discovered several pro-government channels or communities by following YouTube recommendations, as they often suggest similar contents and channels. It is also advisable to follow multiple platforms to observe how and which content moves across this platform. So it's nice to look into the web traffic, like which content is being, which content becomes viral in Facebook, and which content is being created for YouTube, and then which materials are being used in both platforms. So you might want to check on that too. Also note that you must understand the rationale behind your selection of field sites. So this is where you have to justify the things that you are studying. So in other words, you must justify how you selected those sites and why certain pages and communities are biased from others. The same goes for extant digital text you choose for analysis. Lastly, participant observation can also help interpret your data, as it allows you to have a fundamental understanding of your subject's language, gestures, symbols, behavior, among others. Right, so let me just go through this very quickly because Akasha already mentioned some of them. So grounded theory, phenomenology, mixed methods, content analysis, and critical discourse analysis can easily be adapted in digital media research. A grounded theory uses a series of cumulative coding cycles. This is what I do mostly with Maxqda. So you use a series of cumulative coding cycles and reflective analytic memoing, so you write a memo, to develop major categories for theory generation. Phenomenology, which you can also mix with grounded theory, it tends to look at data thematically to extract essences and essentials of participant meanings. Meanwhile, mixed methods research integrates both qualitative and quantitative data analysis for a multi-dimensional approach to inquiry. So I will briefly demonstrate how I employ grounded theory, for example, or critical discourse analysis later as I show you the software. Right, so, but in my research, other than grounded theory, I use critical discourse analysis in examining content, materials, and messages produced and circulated by both pro and anti-government groups. This approach allowed me to delve into intertextual meanings by giving particular attention to the relationships of dominance, discrimination, power, and control as manifested in a language. I also implemented CDA in analyzing the content and comment section of several YouTube videos that promote the state's agenda. Now, how do we analyze digital text? It is required that you learn the rules of the digital environment. This is number one, including where one can move, what one can see, who could see oneself, what regimes of surveillance were enacted, and where censorial intervention may occur. You should also read about algorithms and software designs to understand how they shape conversations, threads, and other forms of social relations in digital platforms. For instance, you may want to ask, how does the user interface influence user experience? What are the functional and behavioral designs that hook users in specific platforms? How do algorithms amplify hate and social polarization? Relatedly, when conducting virtual fieldwork in social media platforms, it is crucial that you recognize filter bubbles. This is very important, the filter bubble, as it affects the level of your exposure on particular issues. Like, for example, I'm a very loud anti-government person, so my Facebook feed often follows the same kind of materials, but as a researcher, it's advisable that you go out of that filter bubble and you only recognize it if you're aware of your own biases. So, but as a researcher, you have to go beyond that so that you can paint a bigger picture or a broader picture of what you wanted to analyze. So yes, so you should also keep an eye on gatekeepers as they play an editorial role in determining information flows in digital platforms. So for those interested in propaganda studies, just a brief introduction about my research. I'm doing both. I'm doing populism studies and I'm doing propaganda studies. So for those interested to do the same, content produced by influencers and microbloggers can also give you a detailed picture of existing political language games. You can identify common talking points or cliches and narratives repeated and circulated by propagandists through their content. Extracted data from these materials can aid your analysis of a certain propaganda's essential features or elements. Right. Allow me to show you the software because since I've talked so much about methods now, oh, it's too big. How do I make it smaller? Let's see. I hope it works. It's still too big, but maybe I can make do this. So this is the interface of Maxqda. Or maybe it's better if I show you step by step. Or is this okay? Because when you open just to give you an idea, when you open this software, it will bring you to the landing page. Will be like a selection of projects. So you can have multiple projects in this software. So this software is called Maxqda 2020. There's a lot of things you can do here, like where's my cursor? There you go. I have two different screens, so it's hard. So here you can import different kinds of data. You can do, you can import text. Like for example, if you did interview, you can import your interview transcript here, or you can use this tool. You can also import images for those doing image analysis or audio, videos, even Twitter data. This is what I was sharing earlier. So what it does, if you click on that, of course, I have to move it to the other screen. Here, you can connect to Twitter. You can select the words that you wanted to search. Like for example, you want to search hate crimes, or some famous hashtags Because if you're already immersed in that environment, you'll have a cue. You'll know what to search for if you are doing participant observation there. So just put the keywords here, and then it limits you to 1 week. So you should be doing this continuously so that you can import a lot of data. Then if you run it here, maybe it's best if I can show you. No, I don't want to show this yet. Let me stick to this first. I will show you that later. But just to show you, there's a lot of things you can do here. Like that's for collecting data, and we're not even there. We're not even at coding and making memos and using the visual tools. But just a briefer, I'll show you what I have here. So here I have a transcript of different presidential speeches. So my research covers 4 presidents in the Philippines, because I try to look at the trend. I try to look at the transformation or even the continuation of governmental practice or propaganda messages in the Philippines from 1930s until the present. But of course, I cannot cover the entire duration. I have to select presidents who are popularly known as populist. So I have 4, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'll just show you the present crazy president we have, Rodrigo Duterte, that's the name. So I have a collection of speeches here. The screen is too small. And so for example, we have a speech here. So what I do, it's a mix of English and Filipino. So what I do is I create codes. So when we speak codes, it means you go into the detail, you read about it, and then you try to explain, like maybe assign a value. For example, this statement, I would find it easy, really, to convey frankly what is in my heart, because my president speaks beyond the script. Like, he has a script, but he doesn't read it. And that's his way of making people feel that he's a genuine leader, like he wanted to share what's in his heart or what's in his mind, and that's how he connect with the audience. So I look for these cues in the speech, and I mark it, for example, as genuine. And then I look at other possible codes. I code the document like this, like so you hear. For example, there are some statements here. These are expletives, like he curses a lot, he uses bad words. So of course it's censored there. But I try to locate where it is and what kind of statement is within that context. Like for example, this statement, it talks about ordinary citizen, or he speaks to ordinary people. And then other codes will be like this, like misogyny, humor, expletives, personal anecdote, about the people, about his hometown, for the people when he speaks about things that promotes people's welfare. For example, he wants to say that it's his destiny to raise people's standard of living, those kind of things. I mark it as for the people. Now, I won't go so much into the details of producing the codes, but so far, I've made all these codes here based on this research, so it's still grounded. You see, I'm not just randomly assigning codes, because I look into every script, and I have like 1,500 scripts here. So you do the coding manually for every speech. So here, for example, I will not open it anymore, and then I have all these codes here. So these codes, I have some notes here saying that if I write anti-capitalist, I also meant anti-rich people, those kind of statements. And I have a couple of codes here, which manifest as an essential element of Duterte's speeches, like anti-corruption, anti-media, anti-oligarchs. He uses also some blasphemous statements, or he talks about China a lot. Now you can also see the number here. All right, so now, since I have all the codes here, so you see you have the documents here, you have the codes here, how do we analyze this? So after you code, so this is how the grounded theory works. So if you have a set of codes and you have a set of speeches to analyze, you can just activate them, select the codes that you want to, I'll just activate everything, or maybe remove some which are still problematic to me. You go to Visual Tools, and then you have a lot of options here. So you can look at the matrix, like a code matrix browser. I can show you briefly some of them. Or map the codes. Maybe we can do this now. So for example, I run this, and then, of course you cannot see because it's an extended screen. Please wait. There you go. So here you see all the codes that I let's remove it so that you know how I did it. Remove codes. So I will insert activated codes, so it automatically goes there. And then I look into the intersection of codes. What do we mean by that? It means like which codes intersect with each other. And why is it important? Because when you're doing this kind of analysis, you wanted to see which elements play together and which elements do, for example, for propaganda, what elements here can create a certain meaning for people. So let me run this. So I choose this. Let's just run it for the purpose of the research. So it will show me, wait, it's tricky. It will not usually be like this, but since I'm sharing screen, I have to move from one screen to another. So it removes some codes that are not present in the speeches I collected. And then it will generate, it's in my screen, let me move it here. It will generate, oh, why can it not show up? It can show you this kind of map. So let me remove the lines first. So here you can see, oh, this is so hard. Okay. You have different options here. For example, I can show like how many instances or the frequency that this kind of elements or this kind of codes are present in those speeches I selected. And then you can also make the dots bigger or smaller so that it can signify how overwhelming the amount of codes are present in those. And you can also see like overlapping connections depending on the frequency. So the idea is the closer the codes are, the closer they are to each other, meaning they are employed in the same statements. For example, when he speaks about anti-corruption, he mostly speaks about his experience as a government official because he's been in service for like 30 years. He's an old man, 75. So when he speaks about corruption, he doesn't speak about himself. He speaks about the larger problem in the government as he experienced personally. So when he speaks about, for example, we can zoom in. This is so hard because you know, it's a very unnatural environment for me, like a projector in my computer. But usually you can zoom in and you can show, like for example, these elements play together. Like when he speaks about China, it connects with fear-mongering, or he also sends message of hope. He tells about, even if he speaks about China, you can also try to interpret it as a way to saying, oh, I represent the people, so this is the will of the people. They like China, those kind of things. Or when he speaks about drugs, it's a very big, you see it's one of the biggest circles here, which connects to political will. And the other here, I mean like the other in a society, the drug addicts or the criminals, you know, those people are tagged as the others. So they are interconnected because when he speaks about anti-drugs, he was saying that he has the political will to eradicate this problem of the people. So, and it also connects to the threats. This clusters can actually, we can show the thickness of the line, but I won't do it now. So there, you can map the codes and give you or help you in producing a better analysis of all the speeches, in this case, that you have. This is very helpful in the sense that, for example, I have 4 presidents in my research. So if I'm able to map this kind of a relationship between elements for one president and compare it with other presidents, I will see which elements play together, which elements have been present for the longest time, which elements change from one presidency to another. So there's so many possibilities if you can actually track all these elements playing in this kind of environment. There are many other possibilities that you can do with this kind of tool. For example, I can show you a code matrix. Now I'm beyond 20 minutes. You know, I get too excited when I share these kind of things, but I won't share you maybe you can explore by yourself, but allow me to maybe in the Q&A, I can just speak about other things that you might be interested in, especially the Twitter importation. I have to do some things for that. So just to end, of course I've shown you all these things, but as a final note, As we reimagine the field and reconfigure our research techniques, we should stay committed to our research agenda, that is, to decolonize knowledge and promote social justice. As social researchers, we must never forget that the responsibility to unshackle the chains that bind societies is in our hands. We must bear in mind that our intervention should not only provoke curiosity or demystify social phenomenon, we must, at the same time, give voice to the voiceless and make the unseen seen. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. The floor is yours now.
Okay. Yeah, I think we will need some time for discussion, 10-15 minutes. Yeah, questions, comments. How can you use this in your project? Yeah, Lungani.
It seems like a very interesting software.
It is.
I'm just wondering, like for a person with very abstract technical skills, like what do you think is the learning curve for this? Like how long would it take for like a person with very limited technical skills to learn this?
It's a very tough question. I mean,
you very technical.
but it's very straightforward, I think.
Yeah.
When you open the software, but there are manuals too, or there are also YouTube videos, like very useful YouTube videos. Learning curve, I'm sorry, I cannot answer the question because
It depends.
I mean, I find it pretty straightforward. You can import the files here, you can do the coding here. You have the file here, you can put, like for example, here I have speeches, but you can also upload here interviews, like interview data. And I wish I can show you other ways on how you can interpret the data, but even images you can put there and just import here. And then you create the codes here. When you click new code, then it creates the code here. Or you can also just create the code like this. For example, it's a Filipino text, talks about the daughter. Then I assign a code. I just click here, and then I create the code. I think it's a very straightforward.
Just say you place a tag, then you.
But I think I just really want to encourage you to use this. This is just one among many softwares that you can use. Like there's Harvard uses this, and Vivo. I don't know how to pronounce it. But this, I think, I mean, I had to search because of the amount of data that I had. I was forced to use the software. I was surprised that I can actually have this amount of data. And imagine I also do YouTube content analysis. And so what I do is I transcribe YouTube videos. And after transcribing the YouTube videos, which if it's in English, it will be okay because it will do it automatically for you here. So if you import YouTube data, if it's in English, then it will transcribe for you. But since it's in Filipino, I had to do the transcription myself, and I can run it in the same program. So there, if you see, I can do analysis of speeches and YouTube videos together and see which elements are actually present in both, or which elements are absent in both. So, but for your question, maybe for this tool, like visualizing, this is maybe something you have to read about or watch some YouTube videos. But then again, the key here is being playful. So learning, I think, has something to do with your enthusiasm to technology. If you are enthusiastic to learn about this technology, I don't think it will be difficult for you. You just play around with the tools. It will not delete your file anyway. So just click and click.
I wasn't asking myself actually.
And usually, softwares are used for quantitative analysis. So, but
Wow.
it's nice that we have software for qualitative research now. So it's really helpful to claim, like to make valid claims. Like for example, during my defense, I had problems with, well, not really a problem, challenges. I'd like to phrase it as a challenge from one of my examiners saying that how do I validate this kind of claims? But if you have this kind of tool, you can easily say, oh, I've analyzed 1,500 speeches. I looked into 10,000 content. I imported like how many Twitter amount of data and made the big data analysis. Then tell me, is it not true? So yeah.
So Kasha, question.
I mean, I will catch him after to actually show me more.
Yeah, when
I
we-
think it might be very useful for me.
It could be very
Yes.
useful.
especially for you, I think. It also does, maybe I can show
But yeah, the question of Lungani is also applied to me, I guess, with the technological stuff. Like,
because if you do Twitter analysis here, it can also show you sentiment analysis. Like it will, but of course you have to assign the values. For example, which one is negative, which one is positive, which one is neutral, is you will assign those codes. So it's still not the computer thinking. That's what I like about the software. It's still you thinking, it's still you assigning the codes, it's still you assigning the values to the codes. And it will just generate the data for you, which will help you interpret the things that you are trying to study.
Question,
Yeah,
there
so-
and then Han. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the software name is Max. How can I pronounce this?
Maxqda?
Ma-
Maxqda. It's a
Maxqda.
Max
Yeah,
qualitative data analysis.
Maxqda. Does it support multiple language?
Oh yes, but it has, of course, softwares always have biases to English.
No, I mean those data. If I can I
Use Korean?
yeah no I mean, can I put the Korean Twitter data on this program?
It will know
And
for
can
sure.
I get can I do some queries from the Korean or other East Asian languages as well?
It is possible. What I'm saying here is
Because
that
the language I mean get some useful analyzing from English and Korean is quite different because the language logic is quite different. So
Yes,
you
yes, of course, of course.
you probably can get
But
useful.
you translated
support,
the
but-
Filipino into English.
it's actually
right?
Filipino, if you can see. What I'm saying is that the software is not everything. It helps you create analysis, but at the end of the day, it's still the researcher thinking, still the researcher reading the text. So regardless of the language, it can pull out the data for you, but the analysis and the logic of how those information flows will still be determined by the researcher. So to a short answer to your question, it's a yes.
And also, if it supports multiple languages, so can user pull data with multiple data with multiple language? I mean, can it analyze English, Japanese, Korean data at one time and then pull some meaningful analyzing?
Short answer again, yes. You just import it, but it will not really affect. I mean, if you upload the file here, whatever you uploaded here will be uploaded as it is. So for example, you see here it's a mix of Filipino and English. I know it's alphabet, but still the same. If I import here a Japanese language, it will show you Japanese language here because it's uploaded as the file. I mean, as the file that you created or the file that you downloaded somewhere. So it doesn't really change the file, but what it does is it puts the file here for you to be able to organize your files, organize the documents, and code the documents and visualize it in the later stage.
Because
of
what I'm
releasing.
concerned is, even if it's the same word, for example, diet, for English user, diet is kind of diabetic. But in Korea, diet, which means is controlling and monitoring and losing weight, is quite different meaning.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Try to listen. The point is, the codes, you create it. The words there, you read it. It's not the software reading it for you. It's you who's reading it. So you will recognize the difference between the English meaning and the Korean meaning. So the point here is that whatever file you upload here, the decision to read it will be based on how you understand the text. It's not the software reading it for you. It's you reading the file. And what it does, it helps you collect data, it helps you analyze data, and it helps you visualize the data. I mean, yeah.
I mean, I would worry if we pull those data automatically like that. Then if researcher need to read the whole data,
Of course you
then
have to.
there
That's
should
the
be so many,
responsibility.
so much dummy.
I mean, that's the responsibility of the researcher. I mean, if you have a lot of data, you have to deal with it. That's a daunting task of researchers. You don't have to, I mean, we'd love to simplify things. That's why we have this kind of tools. But at the end of the day, you have to go through each and every file here, like what I'm doing. It's so it takes time. But of course, it can help you locate some keywords. There are some essential.
Who has
lexical
question?
search.
Ryan, Lungani, and Jonathan, and who else? Yeah.
Maxqda should give me a commission. It's like selling it.
Okay, Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
Can you do this with cinematic script?
I think because this
Yeah,
is just
sure.
like a data organizer, and then you can do it only simplifies your job. It does not do your job for you. So I'm pretty sure I could use it. Not sure if I would want to, but my question is that when you take data from like social media, Facebook, Twitter, it seems like it's limitless how much you can take.
Yeah,
So
right.
my question is, where do you stop? How do you know when to stop?
It's a good question to raise because it's always a challenge, not just with data collection, but also with everything that we do. When do we stop? When do we decide how to limit something? And that's where some of the things that I mentioned earlier will come into play. For example, you limit your scope by limiting your field, or you limit it by keywords. You limit it by deciding which issues do you want to follow. Like for example, in my case, I'm specifically following propaganda messages. So I need to identify which content are actually propaganda, and from there I try to narrow it down. So there's no easy answer.
Time span, right?
The time frame as well. Like for example, as I mentioned earlier, I'm covering 4 presidents, and the reason for that is it helps me limit my field. So it makes me have a logical way of explaining how the government of the self and others, through speeches or through statements, are being continued or transformed over time. So those kind of things. You just have to decide which particular considerations you will have to think about when you collect your data. For me, I stopped because I already have a lot. Especially there's a lot of moving pieces nowadays. So I decided to periodize, put a turning point in, for example, Duterte's presidency. The pandemic, for example, is a very significant turning point. So I stopped from the pandemic because if I consider the pandemic into this analysis, I will have to wait until, and it's beyond my time frame. My scholarship expires next year, so that's the best way to limit yourself, I guess.
And for your professor's question, whether I could apply this for cinema study, I think I could in terms of like discourse analysis, the language.
But for other students, news, right? Governmental released news for certain periods of time also, right? Not only social media, but whatever, abortion or and so on. So we can compare and contrast one period against another period. So, Lungani question, no? Jonathan?
Yeah, I don't know if you could answer actually. A lot of people have suggested this kind of apps to me, and a lot of friends suggested NPFO. So I was thinking, which software do you think most fit to us, like student in social sciences and humanities?
But how are the texts you want to analyze?
Both has almost the same utility, the same functions. So it just was, before you purchase, oh, this is not free, just so you know, but I'm not a seller, okay? Just to be clear about that.
How much is it?
3,500 Taiwan dollars for 2 years, maximum, maximum benefits for 2 years, 3,500. It's not bad. I mean, it's an investment. So, so maybe you'll want to think about the considerations like the price, of course, or which one is more user-friendly. Because before I bought something, and maybe this is how you buy things, you have to read reviews. So I read reviews which software is the easiest to understand in a short period of time, because of course, we have a timeline for ourselves and when we want to finish something. So looking to me, when I read the reviews, I thought that Maxqda is the most user-friendly. But of course, NVivo is also being used in Harvard. So, but I already purchased this. Maybe if you try it, tell me which one is better. I'd appreciate it.
I put it in the proposal for.
Okay. So for example, for Jonathan, you could search